Chapter 1258. When it came to fishing, as long as a fish was smart enough, it would eventually realize that something was wrong. Moreover, this was a group of cultivators from the St. Tao circle. Even though they were blinded by anger and hatred, they still managed to quickly respond. Their eyes were fierce and filled with hatred, as well as fear and dread. After glaring at Chinyu, they turned and left. They couldn't kill Chinyu, and they couldn't kill Baifeng. Now, there were less than a third of those still breathing. Everyone knew that as the number of people continued to decrease, those that remained would die faster and faster. Those from the St. Tao circle also had the qualifications to enter the Lost Garden. Even if they couldn't compare with peak Holy Lands, for better or worse, they were still young elites that were valued. Although they had thought things through, none of them could face death head-on. They had to escape. If he were to survive today, there was still a chance for him to silence Baifeng. As long as Baifeng's death was not witnessed by anyone, even though there was a high chance that the Peach Blossom Garden would still hunt her down, she would still have some room to struggle. Fine, the chances of surviving weren't high, but at least they wouldn't die today. As long as they lived, everything was possible. If they died, everything would be for naught. Whether it was an ostrich mentality or a fluke mentality, they decided to escape. However, when those people turned around to leave, they discovered that a giant net had silently formed in the space they were in. All of them had become fish in that net. Their hearts filled with shock and anger. Their eyes gathered on Chinyu. He looked up at the completely unfamiliar face and brightly smiled. If you help a Buddha to the west, then help him to the end. Mr. Baifeng's anger is still burning, so you might as well stay behind and accept it. What kind of nonsense was he spouting? It was clear they had fallen for a trap. This boy in front of them was simply a best actor. Kill him! With a roar, he turned and rushed forwards. In truth, these people had already guessed that Chinyu wouldn't be easy to deal with. This could be seen from the giant net he had quietly formed. But if they wanted to escape, they had no other choice. They had to kill him first. A fierce battle erupted once more. This time it was a true battle. Chinyu had no choice but to deal with it with 120% caution. The large net that was woven from the laws of this space instantly shook violently. If he used light and darkness together with the power of space and time, it would be much easier to deal with this. But after seeing the peak St. Tao circle cultivators gathered in the Lost Garden, Chinyu didn't want to expose himself. Then he could only endure it. Puff! He spat out a mouthful of blood. As he turned to look at his senior apprentice brother White Phoenix, who was slaughtering his way through, he sighed with emotion. Luckily, he had the foresight to eliminate a great danger first. The stone pagoda was excited. Although its main body was in the distant dark region, this didn't prevent it from clearly sensing Chinyu's current situation. He thought to himself, good Chin, to think that you would have such a day. This is the result of burning the bridge after crossing the river, wantonly slandering and bullying the pagoda. This wretched heavens must have felt that I've been too harsh all these years and decided to give me some compensation. If this was the case, then he would make this compensation even fiercer. In any case, it was impossible for these people to play with Chinyu to death. The stone pagoda had no idea that its current reaction was being monitored by a certain treacherous fellow. Ever since he had determined that in Chinyu's heart he was a tall and imposing figure, the old turtle began to refer to himself as the shadow of the abyss. He was determined to make Chinyu bow his head to him and respect him day by day. Not only did this require his own strength and effort, but he also needed to ensure that in Chinyu's heart he had a unique and supreme status. After experiencing the training in the trial field of the laws, the old turtle felt that this stone pagoda fellow had a slight chance of attacking his status. Of course, it was only a small possibility, one that could almost be ignored. But even so, he absolutely couldn't allow this to happen. This was what it meant to guard against small things and nip them in the bud. Caution and caution were the greatest virtues of the shadow. The reason he was able to remain safe until today was because of these two qualities. Otherwise, did he really think that when he was in the abyss, the will of the abyss hadn't made any other attempts to erase him? Haha, how naive. But in front of someone as cautious as him, he had still been seen through. Now that Vastion had arrived, although he had escaped from the shadow of the abyss, he couldn't lose these virtues. Thus, the old turtle felt that he could start a small live broadcast. Thus, Qin Yu soon sensed the jubilant cheers of the stone pagoda coming from afar. Qin Yu's lips twitched and a cold sneer flashed in his eyes. What a good stone pagoda, I'll remember this debt. Moreover, there was also that bastard old turtle. At this time he was still watching his master being hammered to the point of vomiting blood, and yet he still had the mood to do such things? He was simply disgraceful to the extreme. He would also remember this. But now wasn't the time to settle accounts. He had to put in some effort first. Qin Yu lightly coughed. He said in his heart, "As a dignified shadow of the abyss, I can only watch as my master is being hammered to the point of vomiting blood, and yet I'm not doing anything. Moreover, I'll lose face." The old turtle seriously thought about it and felt that these words were reasonable. No matter what was said, this fellow Qin Yu was still his master. As the saying went, one had to look at the shadow before beating the master. These bastards weren't giving him, the dignified shadow of the abyss, any face at all. Humph, humph! This was only in Vastion. If this were the abyss, he could casually pinch his hand and these bastards would be reduced to dregs. Even so, it wouldn't be too difficult to kill them. Master, at this critical moment, you still need me to help you. But the consumption of strength is not small. You must think of a way to repay me. His tone was calm and relaxed, displaying the demeanor of a great and virtuous master. However, there was a trace of weakness in his voice and a bit of apprehension in his heart. Compared to before, the meaning behind these words was a step further. If Qin Yu, no problem. I will definitely repay you. Qin Yu readily agreed. His heart was at ease. The old turtle immediately felt that in this contest with Qin Yu, he had already gained the upper hand. As he thought, the decision to strike while the iron was hot was the correct one. He was too smart, too quick-witted, and too capable. If this continued, he wouldn't have to worry about subduing Qin Yu. At that time, even if he took the title of master, so what? The one who was truly in charge was him. Cough, so it's like that. All right then, I will cooperate with master and deal with these people first. Qin Yu smiled and nodded. The cold sneer in his heart was like a cold winter wind, piercing straight into the deepest parts of his bones. You think I gave you face, Themen? Perhaps he could beat him at his own game. Vaguely, Qin Yu had grasped the old turtle's mentality. Since this was the case, he might as well use this method to make him work harder in the future. On the surface, he would listen to him and praise the old turtle high and mighty. Then, when he grew impatient in the future, he would stomp him into the mud. That would definitely feel good. As his thoughts raced, Qin Yu's smile became increasingly bright. Across from him, a group of cultivators from the St. Dao circle watched as Qin Yu was hammered until he spat out blood and was in a distressed state. All of them giggled to themselves, feeling a cold chill run up from their tailbone all the way to the top of their heads. This fellow was likely a madman. At the very least, he was a freak. From his appearance, he seemed to be a temperamental person. Fuck! This sort of person was the most difficult to deal with. Who knew whether or not they would be dragged into the grave with him if they were pushed too far. Thinking this, the people that had surrounded Qin Yu paused for a moment and quietly drew back. After all, on the surface, it seemed that Qin Yu had reached his limit. They would never have imagined that after Qin Yu's final smile, a shadow that came from the abyss, a shadow that reflected one of the most terrifying existences in the world, had already decided to attack in order to consolidate his supreme position in Qin Yu's heart. Stone Pagoda? Humph, humph. He was plotted against and didn't even know it. What qualifications did he have to contend with him? From now on, Qin Yu would listen to him. If one had to say who hated Qin Yu the most out of the people that laid down this array formation to kill him, it would be Cliff Ping and Dragon Peak. This was a simple logic. Qin Yu was brought here by the two of them, and they recommended him to everyone on their own initiative to be their scapegoat, their safety wire. The result was like this. If they didn't kill him, then let alone the Peach Blossom Garden's revenge, even everyone that participated in this matter wouldn't let them off. In addition, White Phoenix was far too strong. She spat out mouthfuls of cold air one after another, making one want to pee in their pants. Thus, from the very start, the two of them had chosen Qin Yu as their target. It had to be said that these two fellow apprentice brothers had very similar dispositions. For instance, they would retreat as soon as they saw the situation turn bad. Everyone else retreated, but they didn't retreat as thoroughly as the two of them, running all the way to the outermost perimeter. There were two reasons for them to make this decision. First, Qin Yu's smile was strange, and second, there was definitely a problem with this Qin boy's identity. It had to be known that he had walked the path of the Dragon Mountain Holy Lands and followed them to the Lost Garden. But today he had saved the Peach Blossom Garden and White Phoenix. Wasn't this obvious enough? A fellow of unknown origin that even the half-sage of Dragon Mountain didn't know about. It looked like he was going to go all out. If they didn't run, what else could they do? In fact, these two people were extremely intelligent. At the very least, their thoughts were incomparably correct. But no matter how far they retreated or how far they retreated, they couldn't stop Qin Yu from killing them first. The reason was simple. These two people knew the most about him and were most likely able to guess certain things. For instance, his surname was Qin, and he had saved White Phoenix and entered the Lost Garden through the Dragon Mountain Holy Lands. Although the probability wasn't particularly high, being cautious was a virtue. In this aspect, Qin Yu's thinking was very similar to that of the old turtle. Behind the crowd, Yen Ping, who was prepared to flee at any moment, widened his eyes at this moment. His heart violently shrank as he felt a terrifying aura that was almost tangible. In the next moment, before he could react, his entire body froze in place. Puff! With a muffled sound, a bloody hole opened up on his forehead. The hole penetrated through his brain and exploded backward, bringing along a series of red and white substances. His mouth gurgled twice, and sticky blood gushed out. His corpse fell down with a thud, and his aura was instantly emptied. Qin Yu retracted his hand. His expression was calm, but he sighed inwardly. In the end, he had exposed himself a little too much. Although the Tao of space wasn't as rare as the Tao of light and darkness, there were many people who could truly comprehend it in the Holy Tao Circle. In the Peach Garden, the eldest and second brothers had comprehended it, which made them seem like cabbages. Don't forget that these two were recognized by the Garden Master as valiant existences who had a chance of breaking through to the ruler realm. In the entire vast young world, they were the top existences among the younger generation. Cautious, he had to be cautious. He couldn't expose himself anymore. After all, once his identity was discovered, the West Mountain Nine heads would definitely not let him go. Facing this powerful figure who could face his eldest senior brother head-on, Qin Yu didn't have the slightest confidence. Perhaps he would be forced to reveal all his trump cards and methods. At that time, it would really be fun. Light and darkness as one. Space-time plus one's body. Not to mention anything else. Just these 2 points were enough to drive people crazy. At that time, the ultimate project of the Lost Garden would probably have to be changed from searching for the source of life to hunting Qin Yu. After all, the things he had on him were fatally tempting even to the Saint Tao. Even if Qin Yu was lucky enough to escape the Lost Garden alive, what awaited him in the future would be endless coveting and encirclement. Even the title of the Peach Garden's son-in-law wouldn't be able to protect him. Just thinking about the consequences made him sweat. Stop, he had to stop. Exposing his trump cards to the Tao of space was already his bottom line. Unless it was a life and death situation, He absolutely couldn't reveal the Tao of time and light and darkness as one. Ah! A scream broke the silence of the scene. Long Feng turned and ran, his face twisted. His scream woke everyone up, and they looked at Qin Yu with fear in their eyes. Just now he had pointed a finger forward, and after a slight distortion in space, Yan Ping died. The Tao of space was easy to accept. After all, although they didn't control this thing, they had heard about it so often that their ears would grow calluses. But how could Qin Yu defeat Yan Ping with a single finger? No matter how powerful the Tao of space was, it couldn't be shown off to this extent. There must be something else that they didn't know. And this thing was the main reason why Yan Ping died on the spot. Chapter 1259. Just who was this person? Why did he have such a trump card and patiently wait until he was beaten into a miserable state before taking it out? Was he a masochist? Or, although this trump card was powerful, there was a limit to its use? As everyone's thoughts raced, Qin Yu's complexion changed. This was because, at this moment, Long Feng had actually escaped. With the rules of the world as a thread, this net laid down wasn't able to bind him in the least. As he thought about how he had led the way and how they had avoided so many dangers, indeed, this seemingly ignorant and incompetent son of half-sage Dragon Mountain wasn't simple at all. If he reminded Bai Feng now, there was indeed a chance he could stop him. But after a moment of hesitation, Qin Yu didn't say anything. His intuition told him that Long Feng wasn't easy to deal with. If he insisted on keeping him here, there might be some accident. It seemed that the situation in the Lost Garden was far more complex than he had imagined. Not only were there powerful cultivators like his eldest senior apprentice brother and nine-headed on the surface, but there were likely many others hidden in the shadows, similar to Long Feng's situation. Whatever, there was no need to think too much about this right now. He would first keep these people here. Without stopping his finger, Qin Yu pointed at a second cultivator. This person's complexion wildly changed. He stepped forwards, his aura erupting. After experiencing Yan Ping's death, they were already on guard. Their reaction speed could be said to be fast to the extreme. But it was useless. His body stiffened and his eyes glazed over. Then, with a dull popping sound, a large bloody hole appeared in his forehead. The second, Qin Yu's finger continued to move towards a third person. Thus, in front of everyone's eyes, he killed 3 people 3 times. Corpses littered the ground, and the air filled with the scent of blood. There was no limit. At least in their eyes, Qin Yu had killed Yan Ping's group of 3 with ease, without any difficulty at all. Run. This person is terrifying. The remaining people turned and fled. Many people had seen Long Feng escape just now, but unfortunately, they didn't have the ability to ignore the net of rules. Attack! Break through the seal! A cultivator roared out. In the next moment, his body froze. With a dull thud, blood and white flew into the air as he fell to the ground, becoming the 4th corpse today. Could the net of rules be broken? The answer was yes. So, what Qin Yu was doing now was not to give them a chance. Whoever made the most noise would be the first to be killed. The people of the sacred Tao Circle working together to kill the disciples of the Peach Blossom Garden was a great disaster. However, if he and Bai Feng joined forces to kill them and kill these cultivators, even if they were in the right, they would still cause great trouble. At the very least, the enemies of the Peach Blossom Garden would make a move whenever there was a chance, thinking of ways to send the 2 of them to hell. Thus, it was fine to kill them all. There was no Saint Tao in the Lost Garden, so as long as he did things cleanly and efficiently, he would be able to avoid a lot of trouble. Bai Feng felt depressed. Although he was wantonly slaughtering and venting the anger in his heart, he didn't forget to pay attention to Qin Yu's situation. He had just been saved by Qin Yu. If he were to turn around and burn the bridge after crossing the river and watch on helplessly as Qin Yu was killed, he couldn't do such a thing. To be honest, Bai Feng was quite pleased to see him spitting out blood after being hammered. This brat had actually snatched away Junior's sister Peach Maiden. He had committed a heinous crime. According to Bai Feng's plan, she would first wait for Qin Yu to suffer a bit before acting to save him. Although the graciousness of saving someone's life couldn't be measured, it wasn't something that could be repaid just by saving Qin Yu once. But at the very least, she would be a little more at ease when facing Qin Yu in the future. But who knew that before Bai Feng could enjoy himself, Qin Yu would erupt, blowing out a breath of cold air to kill a cultivator. Although it seemed incomparably powerful, Bai Feng was well aware of his own situation. Bai Feng was enraged and wanted to kill someone in order to regain some face in front of Qin Yu, so he used his final trump card. After leaving the Lost Garden, he would need to recuperate for at least several years before he could fully recover. In comparison, Qin Yu had been far too relaxed. With just a casual finger, he had killed someone. Moreover, lifting a finger and piercing a hole in an enemy's head would cause their corpse to fall backwards. Compared to him blowing out a breath of cold air and freezing someone into an ice sculpture, this seemed far more advanced. Thinking about it, if he hadn't chosen to go into seclusion and had instead gone to find Qin Yu in a fit of rage, the one who would have been hammered might have been him. There was a high chance that the first to fall would have been him. This was because in the entire Peach Garden, who could have imagined that the youngest junior apprentice brother who came in the last would have such swift and fierce killing methods? Thinking about it, if he had really gone and been pressed to the ground by a single finger before he could even teach Qin Yu a lesson, even if his head was hard enough and he wouldn't die, he would still have lost all face. Fuck, why did it feel like he was the one who needed to rejoice? My script shouldn't have been like this. Wasn't I supposed to silently imprison myself for the sake of the greater good and to avoid making any mistakes? Thinking about it, Bai Feng's attacks became even heavier. You bastards, you actually dared to attack me. I absolutely cannot forgive you. Ah, an hour later, at almost the same time, the people in front of Qin Yu and Bai Feng both fell to the ground. The air was thick with the smell of blood. Because the temperature was shockingly low, a dark red fog of blood condensed in the air. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. Third senior apprentice brother, your methods are amazing. This junior brother admires you. When there were people around, he had to put on an act. But when there was no one around, he had to reveal his identity and flatter third senior apprentice brother, reminding him not to forget his previous words. Bai Feng's complexion stiffened. She reluctantly said, Junior apprentice Brother Qin praises me too much. Your strength has truly surpassed my expectations. Is he deliberately holding back and waiting for me to finish off my opponents together? Yes, that's it. I, Bai Feng, am the dignified third disciple of Peach Garden. I have always regarded eldest senior apprentice brother and second senior apprentice brother as my goal. But now I actually have to be humbly held back by someone. This was difficult for Bai Feng to accept, but as she thought about it, it seemed reasonable. Just what sort of proud character was their honorable master? He doted on junior apprentice Sister Peach to the extreme. If he weren't a good son-in-law, how could he have rashly betrothed her to someone else? Junior apprentice Brother Qin Yu had already used his actions to prove his own extraordinariness. Moreover, their teacher had always had a sharp and accurate vision. As for his feelings towards Peach Garden, it wasn't a secret in Peach Garden. Their honorable master must have sensed it, but he hadn't expressed his feelings yet. Perhaps losing to Qin Yu wasn't an injustice. If he had to blame someone, he could only blame himself for not performing well enough. Qin Yu never imagined that his words would cause his third senior apprentice brother to fall into a circle of self-denial and depression. Seeing Qin Yu remain silent, he thought for a moment and said, Third senior apprentice brother, we can't stay here for long. We should leave as soon as possible. Bai Feng nodded. She bitterly smiled inwardly. As expected, she wasn't outstanding enough. She actually needed Qin Yu to remind her of such a simple matter. It seemed that her honorable master was right not to approve of her relationship with junior apprentice Sister Peach. The circle became even deeper. Senior apprentice brother, please. Bai Feng took a deep breath and turned to leave. Qin Yu paused for a moment. Then he lifted a foot and stomped down. The ground violently shook. A shock wave visible to the naked eye swept through the surroundings, erasing all traces of what had happened. Bai Feng stiffened. She didn't even realize something as simple as cleaning up the battlefield and erasing all traces. The circle was so deep that she couldn't see the bottom. After a moment, the two of them stood facing each other. Qin Yu cupped his hands together and said, "Third senior apprentice brother, I followed the orders of my honorable master to secretly enter the lost garden. I didn't mean to hide anything." Bai Feng nodded. "Little junior apprentice brother, there is no need to explain. Since it was honorable master's arrangement, there must be a reason for it." He hesitated for a moment and then took a deep breath. He said, "When the joyous news of little junior apprentice brother and junior apprentice sister Peach spread out, I just happened to be in seclusion. If there was any place where I was rude, I ask little junior apprentice brother to forgive me." Although there was bitterness in his words, there was a bit of apology in them, as well as a bit of sincerity. This, Qin Yu was truly shocked. He never imagined that Bai Feng would mention this matter on his own initiative, and with such an attitude at that. Why did he feel as if he had accepted it? Was this real or fake? Could it be that he was just putting on a facade and plotting something in the dark? One couldn't blame Qin Yu for overthinking things. In such a short period of time, the change in Bai Feng's attitude was far too great. Before this, he had been in seclusion, and now he was congratulating him? Even with Qin Yu's intelligence, he absolutely couldn't imagine how many thoughts had passed through Bai Feng's mind in such a short period of time. How many times had he denied himself? How many times had he strangely thought that Peach Girl should have been with Qin Yu? This was the human heart. Not only was it difficult to fathom, but it was even more difficult to grasp. Sensing Qin Yu's change in complexion, Bai Feng coughed. "Before, I didn't clearly judge my own position and position. This matter is the choice of the garden master and junior apprentice, sister Peach Girl, so what qualifications do I have to question them? After all, junior apprentice, sister Peach Girl, and I have never had anything between us. Moreover, junior apprentice brother has already used your actions to prove that you are indeed more qualified than I am to protect junior apprentice, sister Peach Girl." Qin, you wanted to say, "Third senior apprentice brother, did you make a mistake?" Just now, I was sighing with emotion that the difference in strength between us was too great. I was afraid that you would settle accounts with me afterwards. But how could things suddenly turn out like this? But he held himself back. There were some words that were best kept in his heart. No matter what the reason was, wasn't it fine as long as the result was what he wanted? Qin, you cupped his hands together and bowed. "I knew that senior apprentice brother Bai Feng is a broad-minded person. You definitely won't be estranged from me." Bai Feng nodded. "Of course. You and I are both disciples of Peach Garden, and we share the same breath. There is no reason for us to be estranged." Qin Yu felt relieved. He could conclude that Bai Feng's words were sincere. Suddenly, he felt as if he had inexplicably passed a trial. He was secretly delighted. Perhaps it was because Bai Feng had let go of the obsession in his heart after saying these words, and the normal Bai Feng finally returned. He pondered for a moment and said in a deep voice, "Little junior brother, do you remember who participated in the formation to kill me?" Qin Yu understood his meaning. Two people escaped. One of them was that cultivator surnamed Zhang. Although he doesn't speak much, this array formation should have come from him. Bai Feng lightly said, "When I saw this array formation, I already guessed it. In an accident in the past, I accidentally injured his wife and child. I've tolerated it over and over again, but that's fine. Once the matter of the lost garden comes to an end, I will bring this matter to a close." "Who is the second person junior apprentice brother mentioned?" Qin Yu said Dragon Peak, the son of the half-step saint of Dragon Mountain. Bai Feng furrowed his eyebrows, a thoughtful look on his face. the half-step saint of Dragon Mountain. I heard that he only has one son, but he has been naughty and mischievous since childhood, and his cultivation is mediocre. As he spoke, he glanced at Chinyu. Junior apprentice, brother, seems to be a bit afraid of this person, Chinyu said in a low voice. Although I haven't had much contact with Dragon Peak and I don't know what he is like, if you meet him in the future, third senior apprentice, brother, must be careful. This person is not ordinary. At this time, Qin Yu's weight in Bai Feng's heart was much greater than before. He didn't dare to be careless with such a serious warning. Thank you for the reminder, junior apprentice brother. I will remember it. Bai Feng nodded with a dignified expression. Qin Yu said, Third senior apprentice brother, do we need to? He gestured with his hand. Bai Feng thought for a moment and said, There is no need to force it. If there is a chance, we can help them. Even if they can leave this place alive, they won't dare to say anything. Otherwise, even if you or I don't do anything, others won't forgive them. After all, so many people attacked together, and only the two of them survived. There is no way they can wash this clean. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. Third senior apprentice brother is wise and farsighted. Bai Feng bitterly smiled. That's enough. I have already let go of what happened before. There is no need for junior apprentice brother to flatter me. He took a deep breath and let it out. Since Honorable Master arranged for you to secretly enter the Lost Garden by yourself, I presume he must have considered it. I won't ask too much about it. Then, junior apprentice brother, I fear you will have to act alone, right? Qin Yu nodded. It might be safer for me to act alone. Bai Feng said, the Lost Garden is filled with dangers. 30% of it comes from cultivators and 70% from itself. There are countless ancient life forms living in this place, and there is no lack of extremely strong existences. Junior apprentice brother, you must be careful. He flipped his hand, and a white feather appeared in his palm. This feather contains a trace of Ice Phoenix blood essence. It can sense danger, and it can even be activated at a critical moment to summon an Ice Phoenix phantom to help junior apprentice brother block 1 or 2 attacks. Don't decline. Just take it as my apology to you for going into seclusion before. Qin Yu thought for a moment. He bowed and received the feather with both hands. Thank you, third senior apprentice brother. Bai Feng laughed. Good, straightforward, and efficient. This is the style that junior apprentice brother of my peach garden should have. I will be leaving first. I hope that when we meet again, junior apprentice brother will have an even more amazing performance. She turned and left. Her figure flickered, and she vanished from sight. Qin Yu stood up. After a moment of silence, he revealed a faint smile. The disciples of Peach Garden were indeed different from others. This third senior apprentice brother of his was also an interesting person. To be able to pick up and let go, these words were easy to say, but looking at the boundless world, how many husbands could do this? But just what was the reason for Bai Feng's sudden change? Qin Yu rubbed his chin. He really couldn't figure it out. Forget it. If it was something he couldn't figure out and it wasn't too important, then he would just let it be. Qin Yu looked up to determine the direction. After confirming with the old turtle, his figure moved far away. Because of Bai Feng's matter, he had already been delayed for some time. He didn't know if his target had been discovered ahead of time. Chapter 1260. His luck wasn't bad. The target he chose was still here. After killing off the crimson snake that spat out fire, Qin Yu continued to dig in the deepest part of its cave. Finally, he made a discovery. Looking at the deep green in front of him, although it wasn't too thick, Qin Yu was already incomparably satisfied. It had to be known that this was the Lost Garden, a world of its own. It was supported by the will of a powerful ancient life form, and even the Saint Tao couldn't enter. It wasn't just because the Saint Tao was strong enough to pose an intense threat to the bloodline descendants of the Lost Garden. The more important reason was that the Saint Tao possessed an incomparably formidable perception ability. It was possible that they could break through the concealment of the Lost Garden's aura and lock onto the source of life. If this were true, then the peak ancient life form had paid an astonishing price to ensure that their bloodline could continue, but all of that would have been for someone else. Thus, the Saint Tao couldn't enter the Lost Garden. Thus, when people found the source of life, they had to rely on luck. For many years, this had always been the case. It wasn't that no one had tried other methods, but they had all failed. Until today, Qin Yu took a deep breath, but he still couldn't completely calm the surging excitement in his heart. This was because this matter proved that the old turtle's vague senses weren't wrong. He could indeed lock onto the aura of the source of life. Qin Yu, who had already absorbed the source of life, was well aware of what this meant, because he knew he was excited. I've struck it rich. I've really struck it rich this time. If the Lost Garden could be said to be a labyrinth filled with hidden treasures, then Qin Yu had now obtained a tool that could disperse the fog. Although he couldn't clearly see the entire labyrinth and he couldn't judge just how precious the treasures were through auras, this was already more than enough. It had to be known that although this pool of life didn't seem too remarkable, it was actually an incomparably precious source of life. Even if it was the lowest grade, it was enough to cause a group of Saint Tao Circle cultivators to fight each other, not hesitating to bleed. With the help of the old turtle, Qin Yu had a premonition that this trip to the Lost Garden would be a fruitful one. Cough. Master, the truth is that this isn't anything at all to my abyssal shade, but the loss of strength isn't small. I've reported it. Qin Yu waved his hand, his heroic spirit soaring to the clouds. Don't worry. From now on, as long as you need anything, I will bring it all for you. This kind of old tortoise was definitely worthy of being fed and raised to be fat and strong. A little arrogant attitude, a little untamed in the heart, and some offensive thoughts. Actually, all of these didn't matter. As long as he could make good use of them and had the ability, that was enough. Qin Yu felt that the limits of his tolerance towards the old turtle had risen by yet another level. The old turtle was extremely satisfied with this response. He thought that after today, his supreme status in Qin Yu's heart would be unshakable. Stone Tower? Ha ha! A fool who still hasn't reacted after being schemed against doesn't have the qualifications to compete with me. Moreover, his position as the shadow of the abyss was as stable as Mount Tai. Qin Yu was destined to listen to his every word. Although he had the title of master, the truth was that he would always be ordered around. This is the status and authority that I, the shadow of the abyss, should have. Finally, I endured the humiliation and advanced step by step. After painstakingly planning, I finally achieved this goal. Calm down, don't get agitated. You have to maintain your composure. So it's like that. Then I'll have to trouble Master. I'm a bit tired, so I'll rest first. Master, please begin cultivating. Humph, do you see? Whatever Qin Yu does now will be arranged by me. He will definitely listen without any objections. Qin Yu nodded. Okay. Without hesitation, he stepped forwards and stepped into the source of life. In the next moment, the ice seal appeared once more, indicating that this place already had a master. In the distant, dark nothingness, the stone tower's consciousness was awakened once more. After determining that Qin Yu wanted it and opening the trial field of the laws once more, it was momentarily at a loss. Even in the past, there weren't many people who had the qualifications to use the trial field of the laws to cultivate. Moreover, even if they could use it, the frequency of use wasn't high. After all, not only did this place consume an astonishing amount of energy, but it also placed a considerable burden on the cultivator. The rules were invisible and tangible. If one constantly perceived, controlled, and fused with them, then as time passed, some changes would naturally occur. The requirements for a cultivator's soul and mortal body would also increase. If one couldn't satisfy these requirements, they would suffer instead. The more rules one perceived, the greater the degree of suffering. The last time Chinyu opened the trial field of the laws hadn't been too long ago. Did this boy not want to live anymore? Wasn't he afraid that he would explode from overeating himself? Humph humph. Cultivating might feel good for a moment, but if one couldn't withstand it, they would suffer. Thinking back to Chinyu's previous attitude towards him, the stone tower hesitated for a moment and then decided to remain silent. This time, he had to properly watch Chinyu make a fool of himself. Didn't you want me to open the trial field of the laws? Sure, as long as I provided enough energy, I could open it until the end of time without a problem. Let's see if you'll come beg me later. The stone tower regained its composure. The trial field of the laws opened and Chinyu's consciousness instantly entered. He sneered. He waited. He waited for a long time. He waited for a long time. He was fine. From start to finish, Chinyu's performance was smooth and easy. Moreover, the speed at which he perceived the rules seemed to be even faster than before. How was this possible? The stone tower found this hard to believe. After a moment of hesitation, it consumed some strength to sense Chinyu's condition. Then the stone tower was stunned. Source of life. It was actually another source of life. No wonder this boy Chinyu could crazily perceive the rules. No wonder he could easily withstand it. But when did something like a source of life become cabbages on the side of the road that could be casually picked up? Cabbages certainly couldn't be cabbages. Even after 1,000,000 years passed, a source of life was still a source of life. Then there was only one explanation. The stone tower looked up at the heavens. Of course, this was only a description. You couldn't ask a tower to look up. Luck. Besides some heaven-defying dog-shit luck, the stone tower couldn't think of how Chinyu could find two sources of life in such a short period of time. Although he didn't want to admit it, he had lived for a long time and naturally knew more than others. For a fellow like Chinyu with such ridiculous luck, as long as he didn't court death, he would have considerable achievements in the future. In other words, it was highly likely that the stone tower would never be able to escape Chinyu's demonic clutches, much less be able to make a comeback. Realizing this, the stone tower instantly withered. It felt that its future was doomed to be bleak and bleak. But then again, Chinyu was its master, and he was becoming increasingly strong. There would come a day when others would learn of his relationship with this dark region. Well, even if Chinyu didn't admit it, would anyone believe him? The stone tower didn't think so. In other words, this boy was already tied together with it. He even had no choice but to help it carry the burden on its shoulders. Thinking of this, the stone tower suddenly felt as if it had drilled out of the water and was taking a deep breath. How many years had it been? Although it didn't want to admit it, those matters and those people would eventually come to an end. In the past, the stone tower didn't know what it should do or how far it could go. But now there seemed to be a better choice. It could hide in the dark and let Chinyu take the lead. But the premise was that this boy had to become strong enough. Otherwise, as soon as he appeared, he would be smashed to pieces by the raging storm. That's right, that's how it was. The stone tower was excited. It felt that it was far too smart. That bastard brat Chinyu had always been disrespectful to it. But that doesn't matter. From now on, even if you don't take the initiative to ask me, I will still do my best to help you become stronger. Hee, in an ignorant state, you have already been schemed against. Come and have a taste of it, young man. Things like the trial field of the laws were also divided into grades. After obtaining energy, one could open it. This could only be considered the most basic part. In addition, there were some additional state blessings. For instance, it could make one's mind clearer and allow one to perceive the rules faster. Of course, this came with an additional price. Originally, with the stone tower's mentality, it shouldn't have even thought about these things. But now it clenched its teeth and a sharp light surged in its eyes. As the saying went, if one didn't sacrifice the child, one couldn't catch the wolf. If one didn't pay, how could there be any return? Chinyu, Chinyu, today I will help you and make you feel even better. When you learn the truth later, don't blame me, right? After all, everything I do is for your own good, and you didn't refuse me? That's right, that's how it is. I am simply too smart. It was still the same as when he was in the God-forgetting gorge. Qin Yu stood in front of the stone wall of the laws and suddenly blinked. Why did he suddenly feel his mind become clearer? Moreover, these rules seemed much simpler than before. He carefully looked again. He took a deep breath and looked again. This wasn't an illusion. It wasn't because he had perceived too many rules that there was a deviation in his soul perception. Qin Yu carefully sensed his surroundings. He determined that there was nothing wrong with this change. Then, there didn't seem to be anything to hesitate about, right? Perhaps it was because the quality of this source of life was higher. Time was precious. Cultivation time was especially precious right now. Qin Yu suppressed all his thoughts. He looked at the stone wall with rapt attention. A sharp light surged in his eyes, seeming to reflect the endless sea of stars. The old turtle's complexion changed. He could feel a strength coming from the stone tower. Thus, he discovered that he seemed to have underestimated this fellow. It was actually able to directly interfere with the soul and provide a powerful acceleration ability for Qin Yu's cultivation. With Qin Yu's current desire for cultivation, once he learned of this matter, he would surely place great importance on the stone tower. In other words, this stone tower that he didn't even place in his eyes at all actually had a chance to turn things around. No, absolutely not. He was the dignified shadow of the abyss. He vowed to control Qin Yu in his hands. So how could he allow others to interfere? But why didn't the stone tower display this ability before and instead waited until now? As the old turtle thought about it, his complexion changed. He clenched his teeth and cursed inwardly. This damn tower, it must have seen Qin Yu's potential and wanted to pick the peaches. Yes, that must be it. It was because he had found two sources of life in a row, and also because his strength was rapidly transforming. But this bastard, all of the credit was his. If it weren't for him, the dignified shadow of the abyss, would there be the current Qin Yu? Now, this tower actually jumped out to compete with him for leadership. This was simply a crime worthy of death. If this were the abyss, would he be able to crush you with a single thought? Of course not. Moreover, the feeling that the stone tower gave the old turtle wasn't so simple. If he attacked him, there might be other problems. Thus, fighting him head-on wasn't the best plan. Since he couldn't destroy the enemy physically, he could only compete fairly and display his abilities. I am the dignified shadow of the abyss that has lived for countless years. I possess the two great virtues of caution and caution, and I have also established an omnipotent image in Qin Yu's mind. How could I possibly fear you? Strategically, we can look down on the enemy, but tactically we must go all out. The old turtle began to think. He originally couldn't figure out why the stone tower chose to remain silent after helping Qin Yu. No, it wasn't just silence. There was even a bit of deliberate concealment. Why was this? If this bastard was said to be of noble character and unquestionable integrity, to help others without asking for anything in return, the old turtle didn't believe a single word of it. No, he didn't believe a single word of it. The reason he didn't say anything was because he was waiting for Qin Yu to discover it on his own. This sort of wholeheartedly helping him, but not telling him, was high, absolutely high. Qin Yu would definitely be moved. Perhaps because of the guilt in his heart, he would magnify this feeling. In comparison, the old turtle suddenly realized that what he had done before did not seem to be enough. Not only was it not enough, but it was far worse. The old turtle rejoiced. Luckily, he had always adhered to the two great virtues of caution and never dared to slack off. He had discovered this fellow's plot early on and hadn't given him a chance to move any further. If he could adjust his strategy, there was still time. It seemed that he couldn't change his attitude towards Qin Yu too much in the future. At the very least, he had to pay more attention before subduing the stone tower. Also, that bastard stone tower he was actually able to help Qin Yu cultivate. Although he could do the same, he needed a crushing advantage in order to establish his supreme status. Luckily, this was the Lost Garden. And what Qin Yu cared about the most right now was his source of life. This was the key to his rapid transformation of strength. Hum. And I, the shadow of the abyss, and the great existence that can help him find his source of life. Just this point alone placed him in an invincible position. He would search now. Not only did he have to find his source of life, but he also had to find a higher quality one. He had to make Qin Yu firmly remember that only by following the great shadow of the abyss could he walk further and walk faster. However, strengthening one's sensing ability and selecting the grade of one's source of life would increase the consumption by a great deal. In the end, the old turtle was an extreme character that feared the death world. When it came to the consumption of strength, and strength itself was the foundation of his survival, he instinctively hesitated. But this hesitation only lasted for a brief moment before it was suppressed. If he couldn't sacrifice the child to catch the wolf, then he would do it. The old turtle didn't know that the stone tower had also had this thought not too long ago. But besides this point, their thoughts were completely different. The stone tower didn't think too much about it. It simply didn't want Qin Yu to know that it was he who had helped him. Like this, a misunderstanding had occurred. Chapter 1261. The Lost Garden was very dangerous. This was something Bai Feng had told him before. Of course, this was an objective fact, and it had nothing to do with his words. In this sort of situation, bringing along a person whose cultivation was sealed and who had no ability to protect herself was even more dangerous. No, if the matter of living in the Lost Garden itself was considered a question, then the difficulty of this question would increase by more than 3 times. After all, one person's life could be compared to protecting someone else's safety. One didn't need to think to know just how great the difference was. Tan Hai was currently doing this question that had increased the difficulty by more than 3 times. The person he was protecting was called Sang Zhu. She was his cousin who had bullied him since he was young, but he couldn't do anything about it. In fact, he even felt a tiny bit of satisfaction in his heart. Of course, because their blood relationship was too close, he didn't have any other thoughts. Tan Hai had once asked himself, why was he bullied? In the end, there was no answer. He could only conclude that he owed her something in his previous life. So after Tan Hai's initial anger and annoyance, he finally accompanied her to the Lost Garden. After spitting out a mouthful of blood, Tan Hai wiped the corner of his mouth. He turned to Sang Zhu on his back and boasted, I've been able to withstand beatings since I was young. You should know this, so you don't need to worry. Sang Zhu pursed her lips. Her face was pale, and the smile she squeezed out wasn't convincing at all. I know, brother. I've implicated you this time. Tan Hai's footsteps paused. He couldn't help but sigh. It's been so many years. Ever since you grew up a little. You haven't called me brother. Now I can finally hear it again. Sang Zhu revealed an embarrassed expression. She subconsciously reached out and pinched the soft flesh on his waist. Her fingers moved a little, but in the end she didn't use too much strength. Tan Hai smiled complacently and forcefully lifted her up, saying, Now you know who is the most reliable, right? Don't worry. I promise you that I will definitely bring you to the right place. He looked up into the distance. There was a mountain that rose up from the ground, piercing through the clouds. Sang Zhu was silent. After several breaths of time, she pulled on his collar. Brother, let's go back. Tan Hai's lips curled up. His smile wasn't obvious, but it was filled with pride. What? You don't have confidence in me anymore. Sang Zhu, you should know that since I was young, what I hated the most was being looked down upon by others. So, I will definitely climb this mountain. The corner of the black-robed man's mouth twitched. It was not a sneer or a sneer, but an uncontrollable facial expression after discovering something unbelievable. They had found the whereabouts of the hidden pearl, but they had to pay with the lives of 2 of their subordinates. But the change in the black-robed man's expression had nothing to do with this. To him, the death of 2, 20, or even more of his subordinates was meaningless. Most importantly, she actually dared to go to the place where Tsang Zhu wanted to go. No, she must be stopped. Go. He gritted his teeth and spat out a single word. His black robe moved like the wind and disappeared into the distance. Several cultivators followed behind him, their bodies filled with cold intent. Eldest senior brother lowered his head and looked at the azure dragon in his palm, which had shrunk to the size of a small snake. His eyes were filled with surprise and admiration. As expected of the azure dragon bloodline, the peak of the dragon race, even though it was far from reaching adulthood, its potential was still astonishing. The power of the source of life in this place had been completely absorbed. After waking up from its slumber, it would truly possess the aura of a predator at the top of the food chain. Honorable Master truly had good eyesight. There had never been an accident before. He turned his hand and put away the azure dragon. Then his eyes flashed. The azure dragon had used facts to prove his master's judgment once more. Then, what about junior apprentice Brother Qin? As the disciple that had followed his master for the longest time, he was well aware of just how much he doted on junior apprentice Sister Peach Blossom. Moreover, there were some things he had heard his master mention before. If his master was able to entrust his junior apprentice Sister to him, then it could be seen that his master was extremely satisfied with his junior apprentice brother. Thinking of this, eldest senior brother smiled. He was really curious as to what his junior apprentice brother was doing right now. But since his master hadn't given him any additional instructions, there was no need for him to interfere. So, it was time to do something else. Helping the azure dragon complete its initial transformation and laying down a solid foundation for cultivation was the first goal of this trip to the Lost Garden. As for the second goal, eldest senior brother's eyes fell on Lei Xiaoyu. Her eyes were closed, as if she didn't feel anything, but the rhythm of her breathing was clearly off. After persisting for a moment, she helplessly opened her eyes. Eldest senior brother, why are you looking at me? Her tone was a bit unfriendly. Eldest senior brother smiled. Junior apprentice sister, we should leave. I don't want to. This is master's will. In the peach garden, different voices were allowed to exist, and the disciples were also allowed to keep their own secrets and attitudes. But the will of the garden master was supreme, and no one was allowed to question or provoke her. Lei Xiaoyu glared at him. Let's go. In any case, I don't have much hope in my current state. Eldest senior brother shook his head. If you don't try, how will you know? The ice seal shattered and Qin Yu walked out, this time without the large monkey carrying the stone staff waiting outside. Everything was quiet and peaceful. Raising his head to look around, he took a deep breath, then twisted his neck and stretched his waist. Crackle! Immediately his joints crackled. What was even more terrifying was that as the sound spread out, it caused ripples to appear in the air. It was like the bones beneath Qin Yu's flesh and blood were colliding with each other. The sound produced contained an unbearably formidable strength. This feeling was wonderful. Qin Yu looked down at his palms. They were fair and slender, and could even be said to be very beautiful. But under this harmless appearance, there was a terrifying strength that could make one despair. When he killed the fire-spitting snake, Qin Yu had to expend a bit of effort, but now he could probably pinch it to death with one hand. In the true divinity realm, the increase in strength was measured by the number of rules one could perceive. With the support of the trial field of rules and the stone pagoda's full support, even Qin Yu felt that his progress was a bit slow. When the garden master had Qin Yu conceal his identity and secretly enter the lost garden, her original intention was for him to take this opportunity to forge himself into a large and sturdy bottle. The true saint of the Permethar realm would never have thought that his disciple would have such an opportunity, forging the bottle and improving his strength at the same time, and the speed was so fast that it was unbelievable. When he first entered the lost garden, Qin Yu felt pressured when he saw eldest senior brother, Nine-Headed, and the others. Not long ago, When he saw a third senior brother kill people and form an ice statue with a single breath, he also felt uneasy. So he played a little trick in advance to make third senior brother give up the idea of finding trouble with him in the future. But now, Qin Yu felt that third senior brother's strength did not seem too strong. He had not seen eldest senior brother and nine-headed fight with their own eyes. But if they could reach the top position among the younger generation of the St. Dao Circle, they must have a powerful strength to match. Even now, Qin Yu was still far from this level. In addition, even if he used the back of his head to think, he would know that those who had such achievements and status must have other trump cards in their hands. It would not be too difficult to kill him today. But Qin Yu was very calm. He could not compare to them now, but it did not mean that he could not in the future. He felt that after a period of time, he would be able to try standing together with eldest senior brother, nine-headed, and the others. Cough! He had really become arrogant. He had to stabilize his mentality. Now was not the time to be reckless. Low-key development was the way of the king. There was no need for more. Given the source of life, just now, it would be enough if he had 8 or 10 more. 8 or 10 source of life, even if the quality was high or low. Just this number alone would make anyone think that Qin Yu had gone crazy. But it just so happened that it seemed like it really just needed some time. Cough! Master, while you were in seclusion, I found another source of life. The aura is quite rich, and I think the quality won't disappoint you. As soon as he came out, the old turtle did not stop and directly gave him the coordinates. With this kind of work efficiency and enthusiasm, it would be hard for Qin Yu not to become stronger. But why did this guy's attitude suddenly become so respectful? What happened to that indifferent and calm demeanor of a great and virtuous master? Did he get tired of playing and change his tastes? Forget it. He was not in the mood to care about these things. Now, Qin Yu felt that his time was too precious. The Lost Garden was open, but it would not remain open forever. Moreover, its closure was random and did not have a fixed time limit. According to the jade slip given by the yard master, the shortest time known to be open was less than a month. If so, then more than half of the time had passed. If his luck was bad, he might soon be able to sense the signal that the Lost Garden was about to close. Thinking of this, Qin Yu's heart was filled with urgency. How could he delay? He stepped forwards and soared into the skies. With the old turtle accurately guiding him, it wasn't too difficult to avoid danger. But this was how the world was. Not everything could go as you wished. Qin Yu felt that the old turtle's directions could be trusted. This was something that he had gradually accumulated over a long period of time, and it wasn't wrong in itself. But when bad luck came, it didn't matter if it was right or wrong. He had encountered trouble. Simply put, when Qin Yu flew past a valley that the old turtle had sensed was a safe zone, he was swallowed up by flames that soared into the sky. Then he was pulled into the valley and disappeared. Large swathes of ancient trees and vegetation were instantly burned to ashes. The ground cracked apart, all caused by the high temperature of the flames. But this scene only lasted for an extremely short period of time. Then, an incomparably astonishing scene occurred. The incomparably dry and cracked earth was suddenly soaked in water vapor. Then, seeds sprouted from the ground, absorbing nutrients to wildly grow. The entire process continued for several dozen breaths of time. The valley that had been burned into a blank space by the flames was restored to its original appearance. In fact, it was even more lush and verdant than before. If one hadn't seen it with their own eyes and experienced it for themselves, who would have thought that not too long ago such a horrifying event had occurred in this valley? Qin Yu certainly knew. This was because he was currently wrapped in a mass of flames that was forcefully pulled downwards. With a dull thud, he was like a giant stone that smashed into the crimson magma. The terrifyingly high temperature, crazily, rose all around him. Even with Qin Yu's current state, it was no different from being burned by flames. His flesh and skin instantly festered, but in the next moment it rapidly healed. Qin Yu's goal of forging a sturdy bottle had basically been partially achieved. His mortal body's enhancement was naturally accompanied by his self-strengthening recovery ability. But even if he could recover, the process wouldn't be pleasant. Moreover, this sort of recovery required him to consume his own strength. Qin Yu stepped forwards. The magma beneath him instantly exploded, radiating outwards as he shot up into the skies. He didn't care about anything else. First, he had to leave this magma and think about it. This decision was correct, but the one that had spent so much effort to drag him underground certainly wouldn't allow its prey to escape. It wasn't just because this being was contaminated with the death aura of its bloodline descendant, but also because its aura was alluring enough. This was the aura of its source of life. The underground magma instantly boiled over. Crimson undercurrents erupted, like a giant hand slapping down. Qin Yu lifted a hand and punched out. With a loud explosion, the undercurrents of magma shattered. But his soaring figure was also stopped in its tracks. Out of the corner of his eye, a shadow seemed to flash by. Without time to think, Qin Yu rapidly drew backwards. In the next moment where he stood, magma violently exploded. A wild impact of strength mixed with the waves of magma, crazily sweeping out in all directions. He saw a shadow again. It was thick, black, and large. Just what was that? Qin Yu's complexion paled. It wasn't just because there was something in the magma that seemed extremely difficult to deal with. More importantly, his time was extremely precious. He didn't want to waste even a single breath of time. What he needed to do now was to search for the source of life without pause and then absorb it as much as he could. But at such an important time, he had been inexplicably pulled into the underground magma to fight with some thick black thing. This was simply infuriating. He didn't have time to think about why there was a problem with the old turtle's judgment, nor did he have the mood to question it. Qin Yu only had a single thought in his mind right now, and that was to kill it with all his strength and then immediately leave. As soon as he thought of this, he let out a deep breath. His figure burst out like an arrow, rushing towards the place where the black shadow had hidden itself. He lifted a hand and grasped forwards. Streaks of invisible laws vibrated, forming a crushing and tearing force that brazenly descended upon the underground magma. Chapter 1262. A pained roar sounded out from deep within the magma. As the power of the rules shattered, the surrounding magma was shaken away. He saw it. The words black and thick were correct, but the black wasn't true black. Rather, it was an illusion created by the extreme redness. This was because what was dragging Qin Yu into the magma and wasting his precious time was actually a somewhat familiar-looking snake. That's right, it was the one that Qin Yu had killed before. It was the one that had found its source of life deep within the cave. However, this snake in front of him was much larger. Comparing the two, it was at least several hundred times larger. Where the power of the rules had crushed and torn apart, there were only a few broken scales. In the blink of an eye, they healed back to their original state. A giant lantern-like eye glared at Qin Yu, filled with icy, killing intent. Within the underground magma lake, it was the supreme ruler. It had been many years since any living being had been able to harm it. Roar! With an angry roar, the endless underground magma instantly boiled and erupted, forming wild waves that came crashing in from all directions. Qin Yu spread out his fingers. The power of rules gathered around him, weaving together in layers and forming a net. In the next moment, the magma crashed into him. The net of rules violently shook and his complexion became increasingly ugly. The great snake was far stronger than he had imagined. The net of rules he had created was rapidly being consumed. It wouldn't last much longer. Most of the time, Qin Yu didn't care about something like face. For instance, if he could escape now, he would do so without hesitation. After all, how could he be willing to waste such precious time here? But as he looked around at the waves of magma crashing down on him, Qin Yu gave up on this idea. He couldn't escape. Moreover, from what he could see, even if he used all his cards, He had no idea how much time it would take to kill this great snake. In fact, his mentality was even more pessimistic. Perhaps before he could kill the great snake, Qin Yu would be eaten up by it first. For such a mess to occur at such a critical moment, could it be that he had killed too many people before and was now suffering retribution? As Qin Yu was doubting himself, the old turtle suddenly spoke up, his voice shaking with excitement. "Pre-celestial spirit, it's a pre-celestial spirit." Qin Yu frowned. "You know the origin of this great snake?" The old turtle didn't answer. Instead, he screamed in a crazed tone, "Qin Yu, kill it! No matter what, kill it!" This was the first time Qin Yu had seen the old turtle in such a state. Looking at the situation, this large snake seemed extremely unusual. However, he still took a deep breath and steadied his mind. In a deep voice, he said, "First, tell me, what is an innate spirit?" After several breaths of silence, the old turtle regained some of his composure. But he still spoke very quickly. "The so-called pre-celestial spirit is not some random nonsense recorded in the ancient texts. There is only one true explanation for it. It was born before the heavens and earth." Of course, a more accurate way of putting it is that congenital spirits are living beings that were born during the process of the condensation of the world. They even possess some powerful abilities that are connected to the world. Each of them has the ability to overturn mountains and overturn seas. Qin Yu frowned. From the old turtle's previous loss of composure, as well as his current description, the strength of this large snake in front of him shouldn't be limited to what he saw on the surface. Moreover, this disparity wasn't just a normal amount. Otherwise, it would have been able to exterminate him in a single breath. Why would it bother to drag him into the magma? It was clear that the old turtle sensed some of Qin Yu's thoughts. He took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "In the distant past, when those ancient life forms knew that they were about to perish, if they knew that there was an innate spirit hidden in this part of the world they sealed away, they would surely be filled with endless regret. If those ancient life forms had been able to find it at that time and swallow it up with a method of seizing its body, they might have even been able to change the fate of their entire race. Does Master think that I am exaggerating a bit? But that is not the case. It is because you do not know just what an innate spirit means." At this moment, the old turtle finally calmed down. His heart was filled with emotion. Although Qin Yu had mostly followed his directions after entering the Lost Garden, the first time he discovered the source of life was his own luck, and the second time he killed the fire snake was also his luck. After all, if it weren't for him being stained with a trace of the death aura of the descendant's bloodline, Qin Yu might not have been noticed by the great snake underground, and he wouldn't have had such good fortune. This kid really has the Tao of luck. Great Tao of luck. Taking a deep breath and suppressing his tumbling emotions, the old tortoise continued. Although the innate spirit coexists with heaven and earth, the time of its awakening is uncertain. Some can grow up very quickly, while some need to sleep for a very long time. I'm not sure about the exact reason, but my guess is that the strength of the innate spirit is simply too terrifying, so terrifying that even the heavens and earth are afraid of it and won't allow two innate spirits to exist at the same time. That's why there's a sequence of awakening. Back then, at the end of the era of the ancient era, before this spirit serpent could even awaken, it was sealed in the Lost Garden. Even though the environment here is almost identical to the ancient era, the rules of the great Tao have been severed. All living beings here are destined to be unable to step into the saint realm and above. This is the price that the Lost Garden has to pay in order to exist. Qin Yu's eyes brightened. Are you saying that because of this spirit, is that why the snake's strength has been restricted to this day? That's right. The old turtle bitterly smiled. To put it bluntly, if it weren't for the restrictions of the Lost Garden, I fear it would have already grown into a peak existence within the vast Yang world. In front of it, let alone doing anything, just a glance from Master would be enough to tear apart your soul. Qin Yu licked the corners of his lips, a burning heat in his eyes. As the saying went, fortune was always accompanied by disaster, and disaster was always accompanied by good fortune. This was probably the case. He originally thought that he would be forced to go all out this time, and that the best result would be that he would have to waste a massive amount of time to cultivate. But who would have thought that the current situation would take such a drastic turn? If I kill it, the benefits will be great, right? The old turtle nodded. Great, very great, very great. So great that even now I can't accurately estimate how great it will be. He gulped. How do I say this in truth, master? You can think of this spirit serpent in front of you as a living, incomparably massive and top-quality source of life. This is because its flesh and blood contains an unimaginably pure strength. Not just that. As an innate spirit, it is born from the world and can be regarded as a part of the world itself. Its flesh and blood contains infinite accumulations of the Tao that can transform into the world's rules. If you can refine it, perhaps Master's true divinity Tao will rise to an unimaginable level. What a sweet and fragrant meat pie! To directly smash into his head like this, even with Qin Yu's willpower, he couldn't help but feel a bit dizzy. Innate spirit, this was an innate spirit. He finally somewhat understood why the old turtle was so excited that he was about to die. Looking up, Qin Yu clenched his teeth, a fierce light shining in his eyes. He fiercely glared at the wildly tumbling magma in front of him. Rough Red, where are you? Come out here. You're dead today. As Qin Yu's heart was surging with excitement and killing intent was raging in his chest, the old turtle suddenly cried out miserably. It was a pitiful cry, filled with grief and sorrow. It was like watching helplessly as the golden ingot in his hand fell into a great river, vanishing without a trace. Qin Yu's heart tightened. What is it? He was absolutely certain that the old turtle was today. Whether or not he could smoothly kill the spirit snake today was the key factor in his ascension. He couldn't allow any accidents to occur at this time. The old turtle's voice was bitter, as if it could form a gold thread. Master, you are too weak. Qin Yu was stunned. His first thought was that this fellow was seeking death. Why was he taunting him for no reason at all? Moreover, in the current vast Yang city, just how many people could compare to his speed of growth? But in the next moment he reacted. His complexion darkened, so gloomy that a storm could fall. As for the problem of the bottle and its capacity, the garden master had already explained it. To put it simply, if the bottle wasn't large enough and sturdy enough, then if he ate too much, there would only be one result. He would explode. Bang! With Qin Yu's current strength, that sound would surely shake the heavens and earth. Even if a pre-celestial spirit hadn't grown due to the restrictions of the Lost Garden, it still possessed a background and strength that wasn't something that Qin Yu could eat right now. If he ate it, he would definitely explode to death. If he didn't eat it, that absolutely wouldn't do. Otherwise, Qin Yu would never be able to walk out of the shadow of regret. Qin Yu clenched his teeth and said, Can I eat half? Or even less? I'll think of a way to eat the rest later. The old turtle bitterly smiled. No, a pre-celestial spirit is different from ordinary spirits. It's hard to explain, but once you start eating it, you must swallow it whole. There is no way to preserve it or stop it. The truth was that Qin Yu had already guessed this before he asked. Otherwise, the old turtle wouldn't be in such a state. What should he do? Qin Yu took a deep breath. If you help me, what are the chances of you killing this spirit snake? The old turtle said, The spirit snake's mortal body is incomparably tyrannical. The only way to deal with it is to attack the soul. I am quite skilled in this aspect, so if I erupt with all my strength, I might have a chance. After a moment of hesitation, he continued to say, There is also the stone pagoda under Master's command. In terms of killing the soul, it can also help. Qin Yu said, In other words, the chances of success aren't small. The old turtle hesitated. Master, perhaps we can wait until next time. Before he finished speaking, he was interrupted. Qin Yu's eyes exploded with a sharp light. An accident, or tomorrow, No one knows which one will arrive first. Although what you say is correct, I cannot wait. Today, I will kill this spirit snake and drink its blood and eat its meat. I don't believe that with my great appetite it will really burst apart. Bang! The net of rules shattered. In the next moment, light and darkness erupted in the world of magma. The power of space instantly gathered, forming a cage that locked down the spirit snake hidden in the magma. It was waiting for a chance to erupt with a fatal strike. Before, he hadn't been able to detect the spirit snake ahead of time. One reason was because the magma was sealed deep underground, and the other reason was because it was difficult to find any pre-celestial spiritual energy. But now, at such a close distance, he only needed to pay a small price to smoothly lock onto it. The spirit snake, imprisoned by the power of space, seemed to sense a threat. It opened its mouth and roared, spitting out a mouthful of flames. The space lock instantly twisted. Then it cracked apart and shattered. The reason why the laws of space and time were known as the top laws of the world was because the difficulty of perceiving it surpassed one's imagination was one reason. The second reason was because it possessed a formidable ability. For instance, even though the space lock was broken, it still forcefully imprisoned the spirit snake for a single breath of time. One couldn't underestimate this single breath of time. In a battle between powerhouses, a reversal could occur in the blink of an eye. In the distant, dark nothingness, the only source of light was the stone pagoda. At this time, it was constantly shivering. It had already learned what was happening from Chinyu. It originally thought that this was enough and placed a high value on Chinyu. But it never imagined that it would suffer such a heavy blow in the blink of an eye, causing its ears to ring and its vision to blur. A pre-celestial spirit, it was actually a true pre-celestial spirit that only existed in legends. One that almost no one had ever seen before. He could even encounter one like this. And moreover, it was a pre-celestial spirit that hadn't even matured yet. It was basically equal to a child. This luck, besides kneeling down and begging for mercy, he really didn't know what else to say. Perhaps those matters of the past, those people that died, there really might be a chance for them to be dug up and repaid. Did he still need to hesitate? Of course not. Bang! The stone pagoda erupted. Brilliant light exploded outwards, but it didn't spread in all directions. Rather, it gathered together into an arrow of light that howled out, tearing through the endless darkness. The strength that belonged to the stone pagoda descended into Qin Yu's body through the contract. Thus, the point between his eyebrows lit up and the phantom of a stone pagoda appeared. Then, an arrow of light shot out. The magma instantly shattered. The spirit snake that tore through the space lock was pierced through by the arrow of light. Its massive body wildly thrashed about as it emitted shrill roars. Qin Yu, kill it. Kill it no matter the cost. This was the roar of the stone pagoda. Although it was weak, it couldn't conceal its gnashing teeth. In truth, there was no need to remind him. After determining just what sort of existence a pre-celestial spirit was, Qin Yu had already made his decision. Today he would either be stuffed to death, or he would take off and begin his journey to the exploding heavens. Let this spirit snake escape? That didn't exist. Even if he had to forcefully tear apart this magma lake, he would thoroughly kill it. Stepping forwards, Qin Yu roared, "Turtle!" A certain shadow who had gathered all his strength and was waiting with rapt attention was almost disrupted by that one word. Was there anyone who called someone like this? Moreover, what turtle? Where did this turtle come from? Luckily, he managed to stabilize himself. A phantom instantly stepped out from Qin Yu's body. Its speed was unimaginable as it fell in front of the spirit snake. It lifted a hand and touched the crimson scales that were nearly black. Then it drew back into its body without hesitation. However, it was this seemingly simple and casual movement of his finger that caused the spirit snake, which was howling in pain, to fall silent in an instant. Its eyes widened and the tiny blood vessels on its surface rapidly inflated. Then they burst apart and its eyes turned crimson red. The arrow of light had forcefully pierced through its flesh and blood, tearing open a terrifying wound on the spirit snake's soul. But at this moment, the finger from the shadow of the abyss was like an iceberg that smashed into this wound. The crack on the surface of the soul was instantly torn apart. But what was even more terrifying was that this iceberg contained an extremely cold aura that left one in despair. Like maggots in one's bones, once it was infected, it would be impossible to get rid of it. It wildly spread outwards, gradually causing its entire soul to become numb. Since it was born, this was the first time the spirit snake had felt the threat of death. It inevitably fell into a state of fear. Its only thought was to flee as fast as possible. Flee as far as it could. Bang! Its massive body swept outwards, stirring up a terrifying tide of magma. At the same time, the spirit snake turned and fled, its speed as fast as lightning. But just as he said before, Qin Yu was already prepared to be stuffed to death by it. So how could he let it leave? This was his only chance. If he failed, then with the ability of a pre-celestial spirit, it would be impossible for Qin Yu to lock onto its location. Time! As these two words left his mouth, Qin Yu's complexion paled. The terrifying extraction caused his aura to instantly fall into the abyss. But the one who paid the greatest price was the old turtle that had already attacked once. His pitiful screams made one feel as if a weak young girl was being ravaged by hundreds of large men. The spirit snake that had already turned to flee suddenly froze in place. It was like the void had frozen over, and it was forcefully sealed in place. The panic in its eyes reached its peak at this moment. Then a madness and ruthlessness erupted from the deepest depths of its eyes. It was born alongside the heavens and earth. In terms of the level of life, it was a peak existence amongst all living beings in the world. Even the most powerful bloodline descendants of ancient life forms like the White Phoenix and Azure Dragon were far from being able to compare with it. It knew fear, and it knew how to flee. But it had never lost the pride and toughness in its bones. When there was truly no way to escape and it faced death, the spirit snake didn't lack the determination and will to drag its enemies down with it. But at this time, Qin Yu attacked. He raised his arms, and a terrifying sword intent broke out from his body. The phantoms of the sun and moon fell into the magma. An invisible aura spread out, instantly repelling the crimson magma and forming a massive empty space for 10,000 feet. Chapter 1263. To hold a trump card in his hand that he didn't even know when he had obtained it, it was indeed a bit funny. But after experiencing the matter of cutting down the Black Shadow half-sage and breaking his great Tao with a single sword strike, this proved that a trump card was indeed a trump card, even if one didn't know where it came from or what it meant. As the sun and moon shined together, a figure appeared. He lifted a hand and waved it forwards. A terrifying sword intent instantly condensed around Qin Yu. Cut out! Bang! Like a sword falling from the heavens, the entire underground lake of magma was split in half. Both parts were invaded by the sword intent. The spirit snake screamed. In its world, it didn't have the concept of a Saint Tao or a ruler. But this didn't stop it from clearly feeling the terrifying lethality contained within this sword strike, one that left one in despair. Its soul was wounded again and again. In its current state, even if it risked its life, it still wouldn't be able to block this sword strike. And if it couldn't block it, all that awaited it was death. Perhaps because it was stimulated by the terror of life and death, the spirit snake screamed. Its chaotic consciousness suddenly became clear, and it understood the cause and effect that had occurred to it. It was born with the heavens and earth, and was born first class in the world. But because of a freak combination of factors, it was trapped in the lost garden, unable to fully awaken. Today, it was actually about to be cut down by this tiny life form in front of it, ending its tragic life. How could it be willing to accept such a fate? But whether it was willing or not could never affect reality in the slightest. The sword came slashing down. Within the spirit snake's giant eyes, It could clearly see the trajectory of this sword and the strength contained within it that could destroy all. It could see it, but it couldn't avoid it. This was another bout of misery. In the midst of despair and pain, the spirit snake fell into a deathly tranquility. As its eyes locked onto him, Qin Yu's heart skipped a beat. The old turtle screamed, "Master, be careful!" He never thought that, under the impact of death, this spirit snake would actually open its eyes and realize that it was a pre-celestial spirit. Although it couldn't dramatically increase its strength and reverse the situation today, a pre-celestial spirit was still a pre-celestial spirit. It was born with certain abilities that were connected to the heavens and earth. The sword's shadow tore open a wound and cut into its body. The light in the spirit snake's giant eyes instantly vanished. But in front of the hole, its lips curled up, revealing an extremely human-like sneer, as if it were saying that it would go ahead first and wait for it. In the Lost Garden at that moment, all living beings, regardless of whether they were foreign cultivators or ancient organisms, felt an extremely oppressive pressure. Even their breathing stopped. Raising his head, he saw that yin and yang had suddenly reversed in the sky. It was as if a river of ink had poured over and dyed the sky red. It was like an eternal night had arrived. The darkness emitted a terrifying aura that caused one's heart to tremble, followed by despair. It tumbled endlessly, as if something was about to rush out from within. Bang! An earth-shattering sound rang out, as if the world had been split open. A bolt of lightning descended from the violently shaking and tumbling darkness. It was the same color as the sky, a pure darkness that possessed an extremely powerful quality. When one looked down, it was as if they were looking at a spear forged from ink iron. It descended from the 9 heavens, descending upon the earth to carry out destructive punishment. Perhaps this lightning could be called heavenly punishment. Being underground, Qin Yu couldn't see what was happening outside. But when the yin and yang of the Lost Garden reversed and the skies turned pitch black, he looked up and could clearly see everything. Thus, at this moment, he could also see the black thunder that was filled with a tangible quality as it came crashing down. There was no need for a reason. The moment Qin Yu saw this thunder, he understood this thunder was coming for him. If he could block it, he would live. But if he couldn't block it, he would die. Before the spirit snake died, it had used its pre-celestial will to resonate with the heavens and earth, drawing down a punishment. When a saint of Vastyang was killed, it could cause the world to descend upon them, causing all living beings in the surrounding area to be buried along with them. Moreover, the one being killed today was a pre-celestial spirit. The might contained within this black thunder could be imagined. Although it hadn't arrived, Qin Yu was already completely locked onto. His soul instinctively screamed as he felt the thick shadow of death. He couldn't block it. Without even needing to think about it, Qin Yu came to this conclusion. In front of his eyes, he saw himself being crushed to powder beneath the black thunder, his body and soul destroyed. It was like this was the end that awaited him. Heavenly punishment. In the distant black region, the stone pagoda roared out. This roar contained fear, as well as resentment and anger that couldn't be concealed. Without any hesitation, the stone pagoda violently shook. There was a loud cracking sound as the cracks on its surface began to expand outwards. This was the price it paid in exchange for the eruption of light in the next moment. From between Qin Yu's eyebrows, the phantom of the stone pagoda rose up once more. In the next moment, an arrow of light shot out, piercing through the earth and crashing into the endless heavens. But beneath the black thunder, all of this was useless. The moment the arrow of light collided with it, it was annihilated. It didn't break apart or disperse. Rather, it simply and directly vanished from the world. But without a doubt, this scene contained an even more terrifying strength and will. Kacha! Kacha! The stone pagoda violently shook. Cracks rapidly spread out. The surrounding darkness became increasingly rich, constantly approaching as if it would submerge it once more. "This brat is about to die," What are you waiting for?" It angrily roared. The old turtle shivered. He finally regained his composure from his fear. As an abyssal shadow that feared death, what was happening in front of him had already touched the limits of what he could withstand. From a long time ago, he had already been completely bound together with Chinyu. They were bound together for good or ill, inseparable from one another. If Chinyu died, he would also die. Thus, the old turtle was terrified. He was terrified to the point where his mind went blank and he fell into a lifeless state. But fear was also an incomparably powerful driving force. The more he feared, the more powerful he became. The pale-faced old turtle shook like a sieve, but at this moment he completely erupted. He truly didn't hold back at all. Even the Tao accumulations that belonged to sage scholarly that he swallowed before were completely detonated. Bang! The earth shattered and countless stones and mud shot up into the sky like a flood. Following closely behind was a huge hand that was incomparably black and covered in countless scales. At this moment, the 5 fingers of the hand were clenched into a fist and brazenly smashed towards the black lightning above. There was a heaven-shaking explosion, as if the heavens and earth were colliding. Space distorted visibly, sweeping out in all directions like a tsunami. For 1,000 miles, it was like a hurricane had passed through. The earth was instantly flattened and everything turned to powder. Even though they were separated by an immeasurable distance, one could still clearly feel the strength that burst out from this collision that left one's heart racing and filled with despair. This was utter destruction. The old turtle suddenly turned illusory. He was like an outline drawn out by fog and smoke. He trembled, as if he would completely disintegrate in the next moment. In the end, this was vast Yang, and he was only a shadow that came from the will of the abyss. Although he was extraordinary and lived a long life, in the end a shadow was still a shadow. His all-out eruption only caused the black thunder that had annihilated the arrow of light to pause for a moment. Then it continued downwards. The old turtle was on the verge of shattering at any moment, and the terror in his heart had reached an unprecedented peak. It was a terror that caused him to forget all caution and howl like a madman. "This brat is about to die. What are you waiting for?" These words were roared out by the stone pagoda to wake him up. Now, the old turtle also hoped that he could wake up the big boss behind Chinyu. In other words, that figure seemed to be a woman. Her appearance should be quite good, and she was the one that he had envisioned in his heart. Towards women, the old turtle indeed had no interest, but a woman that was powerful enough to leave him in awe and fear was certainly an exception. Since she had left behind her mark on Chinyu's body, she absolutely wouldn't give up on him so easily. But the problem was that today's situation was far too great, so great that even that person might not be able to escape unscathed. Would she play dead and really give up on Chinyu? Putting himself in her shoes, this wasn't an impossibility. If so, then they were dead for sure today. At this time, the sun and moon phantoms that had fallen into the underground magma and were struck by the black thunder aura suddenly erupted with a blinding light, instantly illuminating the surroundings. A boundless aura was released, making one feel as if the true great sun and silver moon had appeared here. As the sun and moon intertwined, the phantom suddenly solidified. With a deep sigh, she opened her eyes. It was impossible to describe just what sort of eyes these were. They were calm and vivid, bright and indifferent, pure and deep, as if they contained everything in the world and could accommodate all things. She first looked down at Chinyu. Then she looked up, her gaze piercing through everything as it fell onto the black thunder. "Heavenly punishment," she whispered in a low voice, filled with reminiscence and sorrow, as well as a bit of laziness and resentment that came from not having enough sleep in a warm summer. Then she raised her hand, and strands of scarlet red aura quickly gathered in her palm, accompanied by the sounds of ice freezing around her. There was no ice, but the freezing was real. The underground magma that at all its temperature sucked out began to solidify into icy cold stone. All of the heat from the entire underground magma lake gathered in this woman's palm, turning into a crimson sword. The sword wasn't broad and could even be called delicate. It gave off a feeling that it wasn't sturdy enough and could easily break. But who could have imagined that this sword could burn the heavens and earth, boil rivers with a flip of the hand? This could only be used to describe how much power this sword possessed. The woman furrowed her eyebrows, as if she were a bit dissatisfied. She glanced at the only part of the magma that hadn't completely solidified. That was where the spirit snake's corpse was. After a moment of hesitation, she finally gave up on drawing out more strength. She raised her hand and slashed upwards. There was no preparation at all, no warning at all. In her opinion, if she couldn't continue to strengthen the sword, then what was the point in delaying it? If she slashed, then so be it. Thus, in the next moment, all the ignorant creatures in the lost garden who did not understand what was happening saw with their own eyes the great sun rising from the ground. With a resolute and unstoppable stance, it brazenly collided with the black lightning. This time the world was silent. The great sun and black thunder continued to collide, but there was no sound at all. It was as if the strength they released had already surpassed a certain limit. So it wasn't allowed to appear in this world. The wildly twisting space seemed to be wrapped in layers upon layers of thick and sturdy linen, making everything blurry and indistinct. Thus, no one saw the specific result of this collision. But as the twisting space gradually faded away, the great sun and black thunder both vanished from sight. But in the end, there were still people who knew the result. In the lake of magma that had been frozen underground, the woman lifted a hand and traced the point between her eyebrows. There was a shallow wound there that emitted faint traces of blood red. Although she didn't speak, the aura around her was so low that it made it hard to even breathe. It was clear her mood was terrible to the extreme. "You ruined this old lady's face. I will remember this debt." The old turtle had sharp ears and seemed to vaguely hear these words. But it didn't respond at all and continued to act like a corpse. What nonsense! At this time, silence was golden. Otherwise, would it jump out and wait to be silenced? Qin Yu's body shivered. This had nothing to do with fear, but simply because his injuries were too heavy. It was so heavy that he couldn't see a single part of his body that wasn't injured. Although the black thunder had been intercepted, the power of heavenly retribution had covered him, causing him to suffer torture that was nearly cut to pieces. Now, there were countless wounds on his body, each one deep to the bone. His robes had long since been soaked in blood. His field of vision darkened, and his consciousness began to fade. But Qin Yu still struggled to open his eyes and look at the woman above him. He knew that it was she who had saved his life. That trump card he had obtained at some unknown time had come from her. Qin Yu bowed and spoke with difficulty. "Thank you, Senior, for saving my life." These words caused several more wounds to appear on his body. The woman put down her hand that was tracing the point between her eyebrows. She looked at him. Even though she had a belly full of anger, she couldn't vent it any further. He was already in this state. If she moved a finger, this brat would die. Wouldn't that mean that the wounds on his face had all been for nothing? She absolutely couldn't do anything that would cause her to lose money. Calm down. There would be plenty of chances in the future to make this stinky brat pay a price. At that time, she would squeeze him dry before she stopped. "I've been seen. Actually, I didn't want to meet you now. It's not easy to explain. In any case, you have to remember that knowing about my existence won't do you any good. So, I'll tamper with your memories later. Don't worry. Even though my face was hit, I certainly won't make you forget everything. Your memories will blur, just like a dream. In short, you must try your best to live on. When you have the qualifications in the future, I will naturally come looking for you. Or perhaps you might take the initiative to walk in front of me. That's how it is. Enjoy this feast that you risked your life to win. Work hard and don't choke yourself to death. Otherwise, I will suffer a great loss." He turned and walked away. The shadows of the sun and moon extinguished at the same time. The terrifying aura that flooded the underground world vanished like a phantom. It was as if the existence of this woman and everything she said just now had been nothing but an illusion. But at this time, Qin Yu no longer had any spare energy to think or judge. He closed his eyes and fell backwards. The old turtle shivered. He felt that the woman's words just now were in truth reminding him not to talk too much. He wouldn't say anything. He absolutely wouldn't say a single word. Heavenly retribution. That was heavenly retribution. Only after fighting it on his own would he know just what sort of terrifying strength was contained within that black thunder. But such heavenly retribution had been casually blocked by a single sword strike. Although there was a shallow wound between the woman's eyebrows, this didn't affect her heaven-shattering strength and status in the old turtle's heart. This brat Qin Yu, his life was truly good. With such a good life, he definitely wouldn't die this time. As long as he didn't die, his future would be bright. The old turtle took a deep breath and suppressed all of his random thoughts. He stirred up the last bit of his strength and slowly moved Qin Yu towards the spirit snake's corpse. He moved, his speed was extremely slow. The old turtle couldn't help but worry. Would this brat's luck explode and he die at this critical juncture? If so, then it would truly be a tragic and pitiful tragedy. But luckily, this sort of tragedy didn't occur. Qin Yu was shoved into the spirit snake's corpse. The flesh and blood that had been cut through wriggled like a living creature, directly sucking him in. Then the wound actually healed and vanished from sight. The old turtle sighed. As he thought, this prey had been reserved for Qin Yu in advance. There wasn't a share for him. In his current state, wasn't he going to die soon? Just thinking about it made him want to cry. It had to be known that not too long ago he was just a shadow that had snatched away a true sage's Tao accumulation. There was no need to say anything. He could slowly endure this torment. As long as Qin Yu came back to life, he would be saved. Chapter 1264. The entire Lost Garden was deathly silent. Whether it was the foreign cultivators or the ancient era's organisms, none of them were able to recover from that terrifying scene. First, the entire sky suddenly reversed yin and yang. The entire sky turned pitch black, as if an inky river had collapsed. Then black lightning descended. That black lightning was something they had never seen before in their lives. It was so powerful that even though they were separated by an immeasurable distance, they still felt despair and fear from the depths of their hearts. It was a power so powerful that it could completely destroy them in an instant. Then, an arrow of light tore through the earth. Then, an arm covered in black scales appeared. Finally, a great sun rose up before disappearing along with the black lightning. No one knew what had happened, but that didn't stop a small number of people from guessing the truth. For example, that black thunderbolt. If he wasn't mistaken, it should be the legendary heavenly punishment. As soon as they thought of this, their hearts shook. Disbelief and horror surged in the depths of their eyes. What they couldn't believe was that someone in the Lost Garden had done something that could trigger the descent of heavenly punishment. It had to be known that this was heavenly punishment. Even in the vast, vast Yang world, some extremely high-level ancient texts only vaguely mentioned it. But without exception, anyone who triggered heavenly punishment, no matter what they did, was destined to do something that could shake the heavens and earth. It was nearly impossible for cultivators below the Saint Realm to do something like that, nor did they have the qualifications to do so. As for the reason for their horror, it was very simple. After personally witnessing what had happened, it wasn't difficult to conclude that heavenly punishment had been intercepted, or to put it more bluntly, the heavenly punishment that had descended into the Lost Garden had been forcefully scattered by someone. The arrow of light and the giant scaled arm were still fine. Although their strength was far inferior, they still had basic eyesight. What had truly defeated the heavenly punishment was the great sun that had risen from the ground. But this wasn't important. What was important was that the heavenly punishment had been scattered. They didn't dare to imagine what sort of strength was needed to accomplish this, because this had already surpassed the limits of their understanding. There was actually such a terrifying character hidden in the Lost Garden. The ancient era's organisms were confused and terrified. But the foreign cultivators had a faint intuition that the one who had done this was one of their companions. Just who was it? Peach Garden's senior apprentice brother, Western Mountain Nineheads, Heavenly Palace Crown Prince, Netherworld Nightwalker. One name after another appeared in their minds. Some people retreated in fear. Some people looked like they were struggling. But there were also people whose eyes were burning with passion. They were already rushing towards the place where the heavenly punishment would descend. Even the true saint of the Permitha realm might not be qualified to go against the heavenly punishment without suffering any injuries. There was no divine path in the Lost Garden. This was an ironclad law that had been established by a powerful ancient creature that had already perished. In order to continue the bloodline of their race, they had brazenly severed a part of the world. To this day, no one has been able to solve it. In other words, there was a high probability that what blocked the heavenly punishment was an incomparably powerful trump card in the hands of a certain cultivator. For example, the light arrow, the scaled arm, and the sun that rose at the end. Even if he successfully blocked Tian Fa, this person must have used all his trump cards, and even suffered heavy injuries. Of course, these were all guesses, but the possibility was very high. Perhaps he would be able to fish in troubled waters and profit from it. If one's luck was off the charts, they might be able to pick it up for free, a great stroke of luck. But there was definitely a risk. After all, he was someone who could even fight heavenly punishment head-on. If he still had any strength left, these cultivators who rashly approached him would definitely suffer a merciless attack. So, this was a game of gamblers. One needed to risk their life in order to have the qualifications to participate. The first gambler was the first to cautiously arrive at the place where the heavenly punishment had descended. As he saw the flattened earth, his face paled and his body trembled. There was still a trace of aura that hadn't completely dissipated in the air and earth. It exuded a terrifying pressure that left one's mind tense, like a bowstring that could snap at any moment. He clenched his teeth and took a deep breath. Then he spat out a mouthful of blood. This blood directly exploded, turning into a vast expanse of fog. As it twisted, it turned into an extremely blurry blood-red figure that howled out without hesitation. After a moment, the blood-red figure returned and fused into the body of this cultivator. His body trembled, and he opened his eyes, a look of fear on his face. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but before he could make a sound, there was a loud bang as his entire body exploded into pieces. As his flesh and blood touched the ground, it rapidly melted away. In the blink of an eye, it was absorbed by the earth, leaving behind only a faint layer of blood red. In the next moment, several figures appeared. As they looked at the place where this cultivator had exploded, their pupils shrank. This isn't the power of heavenly punishment. The Heavenly Palace's crown prince slowly said. He wore a golden robe with 9 dragons on it and a golden phoenix crown on his head. His face was like a crown of jade, his expression solemn and dignified. Every movement he made exuded the aura of an emperor. His father, the Heavenly Palace's true sage, was known as the one closest to the heavenly Tao beneath the ruler. His comprehension of the world was extremely profound. Now that he spoke, the credibility of his words was naturally high. The rest of them frowned. If this wasn't the power of heavenly punishment, then there was only one possibility. This was a warning from the cultivator who had brought down the heavenly punishment. He really hadn't died, and he even possessed an extremely powerful ability. Did he really have strength to spare? Or was he just bluffing in an attempt to scare away those who coveted him? If there was no answer, then they could only experiment. The eldest senior apprentice brother lightly said, "Peach Garden will not participate." Not participating was just an experiment, but if there was a harvest in the end, they would certainly participate. This was, of course, unfair. If they didn't contribute, then they would have the right to participate. But the one speaking was the eldest senior apprentice brother of Peach Garden, and everyone knew that only 3 people and 1 dragon had come to the Lost Garden. With their status as disciples of Peach Garden, they naturally wouldn't take such a risk. So, although their complexions were a bit gloomy, they didn't say anything. 9 Heads lightly said, "It's not too late to take a look first. This is just the first example. It can't possibly scare away everyone." With a low chuckle, Netherworld Knight said, "If that doesn't work, then we'll just capture some people and throw them in. This shouldn't be too difficult." The Netherworld Holy Land style of doing things had always been cruel. Most of their disciples had slaughtered countless people, so they walked a path similar to the path of slaughter. To them, experimenting with living people was a simple and ordinary matter. No one spoke, but silence sometimes represented tacit agreement, including the eldest senior apprentice brother. One day later, several people gathered together. Although their expressions were calm, there was a hint of solemnity in their eyes. Up until now, a total of 9 people had entered this place. No matter what method they used, whether it was a substitute, a puppet, or just divine sense, all of them died on the spot, their bodies and souls destroyed, not even their corpses remaining. The strongest group of gamblers had almost all died. Most of the remaining were scared stiff and didn't dare to have any more thoughts. No one dared to continue. What should they do now? To be honest, to be able to kill 9 cultivators in a row, there was no lack of tyrannical strength among them. Moreover, it was done in such a straightforward and ruthless way, so it was very likely that they still had some strength left. If it was just a bluff, it could be done once or twice, but now it had been 9 times in a row, and each time it was a direct death. There was no sign of weakness at all. The Crown Prince of the Heavenly Palace withdrew his gaze and said slowly, "I'm afraid we don't have a chance." The eldest senior apprentice brother said, "The Peach Garden will withdraw from today's matter." 9 Heads frowned and glanced at him out of the corner of his eye. There was a flash of light in the depths of his eyes, but he didn't say anything. "You're afraid already?" Netherworld Knight sneered, his pale face full of arrogance. "I don't believe it. Only 9 people died. Why don't we wait a little longer?" He clapped his hands, and in the sound of breaking air, 5 figures came whistling, each carrying a cultivator in their hands. "Young master!" The 5 landed and saluted respectfully. The corners of Night Knight's mouth curled up slightly. His gaze swept over the 10 people whose cultivation was sealed, but whose consciousness was still in a conscious state. "Looking at your expressions, you probably know me. I won't waste any more words. Go in here and leave in another direction, and I'll spare your lives. Don't blame me for not giving you a chance, and don't blame me for not reminding you. If anyone dares to escape, I guarantee that he will be very unhappy." With a wave of his hand, the 5 Netherworld cultivators released the shackles on the 10 people. Their eyes were pleading as they swept over the eldest senior apprentice brother, 9 Heads, the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Palace, and the others. They didn't get any response, and knowing that they couldn't escape this disaster, the 10 gritted their teeth and rushed out. Given the current situation, they could only fight. Night Knight suddenly turned around, and his gaze fell on the eldest senior apprentice brother. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. "The one with the surname Gao. You've always been particular about benevolence and morality. Why don't you say anything? Maybe if you say something, I can be magnanimous and let 1 or 2 go." The eldest senior apprentice brother glanced at him. "If I say something, they will only die faster." Night Knight clapped his hands and laughed. "Smart." The eldest senior apprentice brother's expression was calm. Killing to seek the Tao is not the right path. Although the Netherworld saint has reached the other side, this path is not easy to walk. Your actions today will eventually be met with retribution. You don't need to worry about these things. My Netherworld bloodline has its own great Tao that leads to the heavens. The more lives we kill, the more stable our great Tao will be. Night-Night's eyes were cold. If you don't accept this, then once this matter is over, we can fight it out. The eldest senior apprentice, brother, nodded. All right. A series of screams interrupted the conversation between the two. Night-Night furrowed his eyebrows, a dignified expression on his face. The 10 cultivators that had just entered had all died. He had done something in advance, setting up imprints in their bodies. But even so, he hadn't been able to capture any useful information. Damn it! His eyes turned and fell on the 5 Netherworld cultivators. Their expressions changed, pleading and fear appearing in their eyes. But this didn't affect Night-Night's decision. You all go in. Before he finished speaking, his complexion changed. He saw strange red spots appear on the bodies of the 5 Netherworld cultivators in front of him. Their eyes widened in panic. They grabbed at their necks, blue veins popping out beneath their skin, making them look like black snakes. Bang, bang. In the next moment, their bodies exploded into pieces. Night-Night rapidly retreated, but he still couldn't avoid the blood and flesh splashing onto his body. His complexion changed once more. Bang! Strength erupted within his body, instantly blasting away the torn flesh and blood. But wherever it touched, red spots began to appear. This appearance was exactly the same as what had appeared on the bodies of the 5 Netherworld cultivators before they died. Father, save me! Night-Night screamed in anger. A mass of blood-red light erupted from his body, turning into a giant figure. It lifted a hand and pointed between Night-Night's eyebrows. With a loud explosion, half of his body exploded. His flesh, blood, and bones rapidly grew back. After several breaths of time, Night-Night's body was completely restored. His face was deathly pale, without the slightest hint of blood. The blood-red light faded away. Night-Night looked towards the area where the heavenly retribution had descended. His eyes were filled with unconcealable panic. He never imagined that even though he hadn't personally taken action, he would still be implicated. If it weren't for his father's blood shadow avatar, he feared he would have died. Only by personally experiencing it could one understand just how terrifying that strength was. What was contained within that red spot was a will to annihilate. Any living being that wasn't allowed to enter this land would be thoroughly erased. After experiencing this, Night-Night was able to confirm that the one that had forcefully resisted the heavenly retribution still had enough strength remaining. At the very least, he had no chance at all. But in order to reach this conclusion, he had paid the lives of 5 of his subordinates, his father's blood avatar as a trump card, and even half of his own body. The price could be said to be disastrous. Thinking of this, Night-Night's complexion became increasingly ugly. He glanced at the heavenly retribution land and then turned to leave. Since there was no chance, there was no meaning in staying any longer. Moreover, he was worried that he had already provoked trouble. If so, then leaving was the best option. He could plan further in the future. But at this time, Night-Night suddenly roared out, "Gao zhuang zhuang!" Bang! With a loud explosion, he was sent flying backwards. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face was pale with a hint of blue. The eldest senior apprentice, brother, drew back his fist. He calmly said, "You said that after this matter was over, we would have a match. I kept my promise and attacked. I saw that your body wasn't feeling well, so I only punched you as a lesson. There's no need to thank me." Night-Night was enraged. "You," the eldest senior apprentice brother lightly said, "if you don't accept it, then let's continue. If we fight fairly, even if there are casualties, the Netherworld Saint will understand. If you don't understand, then ask the Saint to come to the Peach Garden. My honorable master has already said that he fought with the Netherworld Saint in the past, and victory has yet to be determined." Night-Night spat out another mouthful of blood. "Peach Garden. Good, very good. Just you wait." He turned and left. After being punched by the eldest senior apprentice brother, his condition became even worse. He needed to find a place to stabilize his injuries as soon as possible. After all, this was the Lost Garden. The degree of danger here was something that even people like them couldn't afford to underestimate. 9 heads had no expression. "If you continue to attack, I will stop you," the eldest senior apprentice brother said. "That is why I only punched once." 9 heads raised an eyebrow. He turned and took a step forward, his figure instantly disappearing. The crown prince of the heavenly palace said in a low voice, "Brother Gao, there is no need to be impulsive. The Netherworld Saint's temperament has become increasingly strange these past few years. It is not wise to provoke him." The eldest senior apprentice brother smiled. "Thank you for the reminder. But the Peach Garden has been too peaceful and harmless these past few years. Some people have forgotten that those who come from the Peach Garden have always been overbearing and domineering." After a pause, a trace of embarrassment appeared on his face. "As the eldest senior apprentice brother of the Peach Garden, I have been in seclusion all these years and rarely care about the outside world. Speaking of which, I cannot shirk my responsibility, so I might as well take this opportunity to teach some people a lesson." The crown prince of the heavenly palace hesitated for a moment. "Junior apprentice, Sister Peach," the eldest senior apprentice brother interrupted him. "Junior apprentice sister is fine, but you should be clear of my master's style. Perhaps he has already taken advantage of us juniors' absence to attack Sage Huai. This is not a place to linger for long. In order to avoid trouble, I will take my leave first. Farewell." He turned and left. The crown prince of the heavenly palace revealed a helpless expression. He smiled bitterly as he thought, "I know your master's style all too well. After so many years, the pair of stone lions at the entrance of my heavenly palace, the ones used to stabilize destiny, are still missing one. I heard that your master moved it back and threw it into the wine cellar to suppress the spring. However, if the Peach Garden and the 2 saints of the Western Mountain were to fight, this world would be lively once again. Forget it. I'll leave these matters between the saints to worry about on their own. I should also hurry and leave this place, lest I attract trouble." Chapter 1265. The entire Lost Garden was deathly silent, whether it was the foreign cultivators or the ancient era's organisms. None of them were able to recover from that terrifying scene. First, the entire sky suddenly reversed yin and yang. The entire sky turned pitch black, as if an inky river had collapsed. Then black lightning descended. That black lightning was something they had never seen before in their lives. It was so powerful that even though they were separated by an immeasurable distance, they still felt despair and fear from the depths of their hearts. It was a power so powerful that it could completely destroy them in an instant. Then, an arrow of light tore through the earth. Then, an arm covered in black scales appeared. Finally, a great sun rose up before disappearing along with the black lightning. No one knew what had happened, but that didn't stop a small number of people from guessing the truth. For example, that black thunderbolt. If he wasn't mistaken, it should be the legendary heavenly punishment. As soon as they thought of this, their hearts shook. Disbelief and horror surged in the depths of their eyes. What they couldn't believe was that someone in the Lost Garden had done something that could trigger the descent of heavenly punishment. It had to be known that this was heavenly punishment. Even in the vast, vast young world, some extremely high-level ancient texts only vaguely mentioned it. But without exception, anyone who triggered heavenly punishment, no matter what they did, was destined to do something that could shake the heavens and earth. It was nearly impossible for cultivators below the Saint Realm to do something like that, nor did they have the qualifications to do so. As for the reason for their horror, it was very simple. After personally witnessing what had happened, it wasn't difficult to conclude that heavenly punishment had been intercepted. Or, to put it more bluntly and bluntly, the heavenly punishment that had descended into the Lost Garden had been forcefully scattered by someone. The arrow of light and the giant scaled arm were still manageable. Although their strength was far inferior, they still had basic eyesight. What had truly defeated the heavenly punishment was the great sun that had risen from the ground. But this wasn't important. What was important was that the heavenly punishment had been scattered. They didn't dare to imagine what sort of strength was required to accomplish this, because this had already surpassed the limits of their understanding. There was actually such a terrifying character hidden in the lost garden. The ancient era's organisms were confused and terrified. But the foreign cultivators had a faint intuition that the one who had done this was one of their companions. Just who was it? Peach Garden Senior, apprentice brother, Western Mountain Nine Heads, Heavenly Palace Crown Prince, Netherworld Night Stalker. One name after another appeared in their minds. Some people retreated in fear. Some people looked like they were struggling, but there were also people whose eyes were burning with passion. They were already rushing towards the place where the heavenly punishment would descend. Even the true saint of the Permitha realm might not be qualified to go against the heavenly punishment without suffering any injuries. There was no divine path in the lost garden. This was an ironclad law that had been established by a powerful ancient being in order to continue the bloodline of its race. To this day, no one has been able to solve it. In other words, there was a high probability that what blocked the heavenly punishment was an incomparably powerful trump card in the hands of a certain cultivator. For example, the light arrow, the scaled arm, and the sun that rose at the end. Even if he successfully blocked Tian Fa, this person must have used all his trump cards, and even suffered heavy injuries. Of course, these were all guesses, but the possibility was very high. Perhaps he would be able to fish in troubled waters and profit from it. If one's luck was off the charts, they might be able to pick it up for free, a great stroke of luck. But there was definitely a risk. After all, he was someone who could even fight heavenly punishment head-on. If he still had any strength left, these cultivators who rashly approached him would definitely suffer a merciless attack. So, this was a game of gamblers. One needed to risk their life in order to have the qualifications to participate. The first gambler was the first to cautiously arrive at the place where the heavenly punishment had descended. As he saw the flattened earth, his face paled and his body trembled. There was still a trace of aura that hadn't completely dissipated in the air and earth. It exuded a terrifying pressure that left one's mind tense, like a bowstring that could snap at any moment. He clenched his teeth and took a deep breath. Then he spat out a mouthful of blood. This blood directly exploded, turning into a vast expanse of fog. It twisted and turned into an extremely blurry blood-red figure that howled out without hesitation. After a moment, the blood-red figure returned and fused into the body of this cultivator. His body trembled, and he opened his eyes, a look of fear on his face. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but before he could make a sound, there was a loud bang as his entire body exploded into pieces. As his flesh and blood touched the ground, it rapidly melted away. In the blink of an eye, it was absorbed by the earth, leaving behind only a faint layer of blood red. In the next moment, several figures appeared. As they looked at the place where this cultivator had exploded, their pupils shrank. This isn't the power of heavenly punishment. The Heavenly Palace's crown prince slowly said. He wore a golden robe with 9 dragons on it and a golden phoenix crown on his head. His face was like a crown of jade, and his eyes were solemn and dignified. Every movement he made exuded the aura of an emperor. His father, the Heavenly Palace's true saint, was said to be the one closest to the heavenly Tao beneath the ruler. He had an extremely deep comprehension of the world's energy, so his words were naturally trustworthy. The rest of them frowned. If this wasn't the power of heavenly punishment, then there was only one possibility. This was a warning from the cultivator who had drawn down heavenly punishment. He really hadn't died, and he even possessed an extremely powerful ability. Did he really have strength to spare, or was he just bluffing in an attempt to scare away those who coveted him? If there was no answer, then they could only experiment. The eldest senior apprentice brother lightly said, "Peach Garden will not participate." Not participating was an experiment, but if there was a harvest in the end, they would certainly participate. This wasn't fair. If they didn't contribute, they would have the right to participate. But the one speaking was the eldest senior apprentice brother of Peach Garden. Moreover, everyone knew that only 3 people and 1 dragon had come to the Lost Garden. With their status as disciples of Peach Garden, they naturally wouldn't take such a risk. So, although their complexions were a bit gloomy, they didn't say anything. 9 heads lightly said, "It's not too late to take a look first. This is only the first example. It can't possibly scare away everyone." With a low chuckle, Netherworld Knight said, "If that doesn't work, then we can just catch some people and throw them in. This shouldn't be too difficult." The Netherworld Holy Lands had always been cruel and ruthless. Most of their disciples had killed countless people, so they walked a path similar to the path of slaughter. To them, experimenting with living people was a simple and ordinary matter. No one spoke, but silence sometimes represented tacit agreement, including the eldest senior apprentice brother. One day later, several people gathered together. Although their expressions were calm, there was a hint of solemnity in their eyes. Up until now, a total of 9 people had entered this place. No matter what method they used, whether it was a substitute, a puppet, or just divine sense, all of them died on the spot, their bodies and souls extinguished without a corpse remaining. The strongest gamblers had almost all died. The remaining ones were scared stiff and didn't dare to think of anything else. No one dared to continue. What should they do now? To be honest, to be able to kill 9 cultivators in a row, there was no lack of tyrannical strength among them. Moreover, they used such a direct and ruthless method, so it was very likely that they still had some strength left. If it was a bluff, it could be done once or twice, but now it had been 9 times in a row, and each time it was a direct death. There was no weakness to be seen. The crown prince of the heavenly palace withdrew his gaze and said slowly, "I'm afraid we don't have a chance." The eldest senior apprentice brother said, "The Peach Garden will withdraw from today's matter." 9 heads frowned and glanced at him out of the corner of his eye. There was a flash of light in the depths of his eyes, but he didn't say anything. "You're afraid already?" Netherworld Knight sneered, his pale face full of arrogance. "I don't believe it. Only 9 people died. Why don't we wait a little longer?" He clapped his hands, and in the sound of breaking air, 5 figures came whistling, each carrying a cultivator in their hands. "Young master!" The 5 landed and saluted respectfully. The corners of Night Knight's mouth curled up slightly. His gaze swept over the 10 people whose cultivation was sealed but whose consciousness was still in a state of consciousness. "Looking at your expressions, you probably know me. Let's not talk nonsense. Go in here and leave from another direction, and I'll spare your lives. Don't blame me for not giving you a chance, and don't blame me for not reminding you. If anyone dares to escape, I guarantee that he will be very unhappy." With a wave of his hand, the 5 Netherworld cultivators released the shackles on the 10 people. Their eyes were pleading as they swept over the eldest senior apprentice brother, 9 heads, the crown prince of the heavenly palace, and the others. They didn't get any response. Knowing that they couldn't escape this disaster, the 10 people gritted their teeth and rushed out. Given the current situation, they could only fight. Night Knight suddenly turned around, and his gaze fell on the eldest senior apprentice brother. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. "The one with the surname Gao. You've always been particular about benevolence and morality. Why don't you say anything? Maybe if you say something, I can be magnanimous and let 1 or 2 go." The eldest senior apprentice brother glanced at him. "If I say something, they will only die faster." Night Knight clapped his hands and laughed. "Smart." The eldest senior apprentice brother's expression was calm. Killing to seek the Tao is not the right path. Although the Netherworld saint has reached the other side, this path is not easy to walk. Your actions today will eventually be met with retribution. You don't need to worry about these things. My netherworld bloodline has its own great Tao that leads to the heavens. The more lives we kill, the more stable our great Tao will be. Night-Night's eyes were cold. If you don't accept this, then once this matter is over, we can fight. The eldest senior apprentice, brother, nodded. All right. A series of miserable screams interrupted the conversation between the two. Night-Night frowned, a solemn expression on his face. The 10 cultivators that had just entered had all died. He had done something in advance, setting up imprints in their bodies. But even so, he hadn't been able to capture any useful information. Damn it! His eyes turned and fell on the 5 netherworld cultivators. Their expressions changed, pleading and fear appearing in their eyes. But this didn't affect Night-Night's decision at all. You go in. Before he finished speaking, his complexion changed. He saw strange red spots appear on the bodies of the 5 netherworld cultivators in front of him. Their eyes widened in panic. They grabbed at their necks, blue veins popping out beneath their skin, making them look like black snakes. Bang, bang. In the next moment, their bodies exploded into pieces. Night-Night rapidly retreated, but he couldn't help but be stained by the splashing flesh and blood. His complexion changed once more. Bang! Strength erupted within his body, instantly blasting away the torn flesh and blood. But wherever it touched, red spots began to appear. This appearance was exactly the same as what had appeared on the bodies of the 5 netherworld cultivators before they died. "Father, save me!" Night-Night screamed in anger. A mass of blood-red light erupted from his body, turning into a giant figure. He lifted a hand and pointed between Night-Night's eyebrows. With a loud explosion, half of his body exploded. His flesh and blood rapidly grew back. After several breaths of time, Night-Night's body was restored to its original state. But his face was deathly pale without the least bit of blood left in it. The blood-red light figure dissipated. Night-Night looked towards the place where the heavenly retribution had descended. His eyes filled with unconcealable panic. He never imagined that even though he hadn't personally taken action, he would still be implicated. If it weren't for his father's blood shadow avatar, he feared he would have perished. Only by personally experiencing it could one understand just how terrifying that strength was. What was contained within those red spots was a will to annihilate. Any living being that wasn't allowed to enter this land would be thoroughly erased. After experiencing this, Night-Night was able to confirm that the one that resisted the heavenly retribution still had enough strength remaining. At the very least, he had no chance at all. But in order to reach this conclusion, he had paid the lives of 5 subordinates, his father's blood avatar as a trump card, and even half of his own body. The price could be said to be disastrous. Thinking of this, Night-Night's complexion became increasingly ugly. He glanced at the heavenly retribution land and then turned to leave. Since there was no chance, there was no meaning in staying any longer. Moreover, he was worried that he had already provoked trouble. If so, then leaving was the best option. He could plan further in the future. But at this time, Night-Night roared out loud, "Gao, shuang, shuang!" Bang! With a loud explosion, he was sent flying backwards. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face was pale with a hint of blue. The eldest senior apprentice, brother, drew back his fist. He calmly said, "You said that after this matter was over, we would have a match. I kept my promise and attacked. I saw that you weren't feeling well, so I only punched you as a lesson. There is no need to thank me." Night-Night was enraged. "You," the eldest senior apprentice brother lightly said, "if you aren't convinced or willing, then let's continue. If we fight fairly, even if there are casualties, the Netherworld Saint will understand. If you don't understand, then invite the Saint to come to the Peach Garden. My honorable master has already said that he fought with the Netherworld Saint in the past, and victory has yet to be determined." Night-Night spat out another mouthful of blood. "Peach Garden. Good, very good. Just you wait." He turned and left. After being punched by the eldest senior apprentice brother, his condition became even worse. He needed to find a place to stabilize his injuries as soon as possible. After all, this was the Lost Garden. The degree of danger here was something that even people like them couldn't afford to underestimate. 9 heads had no expression. "If you continue to attack, I will stop you," the eldest senior apprentice brother said. "That is why I only punched once." 9 heads arched an eyebrow. He turned and took a step forward, his figure instantly disappearing. The crown prince of the heavenly palace said in a low voice, "Brother Gao, there is no need to be impulsive. The netherworld saint's temperament has become increasingly strange these past few years. It is not wise to provoke him." The eldest senior apprentice brother smiled. "Thank you for the reminder, but the peach garden seems to have been too peaceful and harmless these past few years. Some people have forgotten that those who come from the peach garden have always been overbearing and domineering." He paused for a moment, a trace of embarrassment on his face. "As the eldest senior apprentice brother of the peach garden, I have been in seclusion all these years and rarely pay attention to the outside world. Speaking of which, I cannot shirk my responsibility, so I might as well take this opportunity to teach some people a lesson." The crown prince of the heavenly palace hesitated for a moment. "Junior apprentice, Sister Peach, the eldest senior apprentice brother interrupted him. "Junior apprentice sister is fine, but you should be clear of my master's style. Perhaps he has already taken advantage of us juniors' absence to attack Sage Huai. This is not a place to stay for long. In order to avoid trouble, I will take my leave first. Farewell." He turned and walked away. The heavenly palace's crown prince revealed a helpless expression. He bitterly smiled. "He thought that he understood your master's style far too well. After so many years, the pair of stone lions at the entrance of my heavenly palace, the ones used to stabilize destiny, were still missing one. I heard that your master had moved them back and tossed them into a wine cellar to suppress the spring. However, if the Peach Garden and the West Mountain Two Saints were to fight, then this world would be lively once more. Forget it. These matters between saints should be left for them to worry about. I should hurry and leave this place, lest I provoke any more trouble." Chapter 1264. The Banquet That Has Just Begun in Truth. None of this had anything to do with Qinyu at all. Moreover, Nightwalker's attempt had nearly succeeded. This was because when that woman left, she had casually laid down a mark. At most, she would be able to kill 3 to 5 more people before exhausting her strength. Cough, cough. Thinking about it, it was actually quite a pity. If only Nightwalker had been a bit more stubborn, then perhaps what happened next would have been a completely different story. But in this world, there were no ifs. As the old turtle sighed with emotion, although Qinyu had suffered a great deal along the way, his luck had generally been good. But Qinyu's luck had been good. Now, it was like he had been placed in a giant furnace and was being crazily burned and forged. The spirit snake had already been killed. If one directly absorbed and refined its flesh and blood, then they would be able to walk to the peak and beat up geniuses from all walks of life, dominating the world that was impossible. How could something be so easy? Although this world wasn't fair, there was still a general balance. If one wanted to obtain more, they had to pay more. For instance, this spirit snake's corpse. After its consciousness was erased by the soul shredder, it was indeed a sparkling treasure. But this treasure was far too great. If one wanted to eat it, not only did they need a good appetite, but they also needed to pass a test ahead of time. For instance, they had to withstand the extreme heat contained within its flesh and blood. If they couldn't even withstand this temperature, then they wouldn't even have the qualifications to eat it. Or, even if they forced themselves to eat it, they would only end up with their intestines rotting away. Strictly speaking, this couldn't be considered a test aimed at Qinyu. Rather, it was more appropriate to call it a game of climbing chairs. The dining table was already prepared. But first, One had to have the ability to sit on the dining chair before they could start eating. Qin Yu was unconscious. Although he was spared the pain of the flesh and blood, he didn't know what sort of situation he was facing right now, nor did he know how to deal with it. He entered the spirit snake's body through the wound. As the flesh and blood wriggled, he was pulled all the way to its heart and entered it. The spirit serpent is very big and thick. We've talked about it before, but it's hard to directly describe its size. Now, there was a better way to describe it. Because the spirit snake was large, its heart was naturally large. The unconscious Qin Yu lay within it, as if he were sleeping in a large and spacious house. But unfortunately, this large house wasn't friendly at all. As it shrank and expanded, it gathered the burning strength of its flesh and blood, concentrating it in its heart and wrapping around Qin Yu. If it weren't for the fact that Qin Yu had absorbed 2 sources of life before, making this large bottle that was Qin Yu much larger and more solid, he would have been forcefully refined by now. Of course, he wouldn't die. Although the spirit snake's corpse had no consciousness, it had a powerful survival instinct. What it wanted to do was refine Qin Yu into a heart core. Once it succeeded, Qin Yu's past would be erased and he would become a part of the spirit snake. Or, it was more accurate to say that he would become the new consciousness of the spirit snake. Then, a pre-celestial spirit would be reborn. This was a pre-celestial spirit that was striving to be reborn. This was an ability that the world itself had bestowed upon it when it was born. So, at this time, the spirit snake's mortal body was like an independent world. No one could help Qin Yu. He could only rely on himself. Within the giant spirit snake's heart, a burning strength that was so red that it was nearly black wrapped around Qin Yu, forming a coffin shape. Within it, Qin Yu's mortal body began to melt. His skin and flesh and blood began to turn into a liquid state. Then, without accident, he would slowly melt like ice cream beneath the blazing sun. He would be absorbed by the spirit snake's heart and finally condense into a heart core. But a long time ago, Qin Yu had grasped a supernatural ability called the 5-element samsara. It could mobilize the power of the 5 elements of metal, water, wood, fire, and earth to form a giant grinding disc that could crush, suppress, attack, and defend. This supernatural ability involved the path of the rules. Thus, in truth, the 5-element rules were the type that Qin Yu excelled in. This was because he already had a foundation in them. Thus, when he absorbed his source of life and used the trial field of the rules to rapidly perceive the laws and increase his strength, the 5-element rules were one of Qin Yu's first choices. The 5-element fire was included. The composition of a flame, the temperature it contained, and the attribute of burning all things. Every detail needed to be matched with different laws in order to release a flame that came from the power of the rules and had the killing might it should have. For instance, the burning strength contained within the spirit snake's flesh and blood was a type of flame that belonged to the rules. Otherwise, with Qin Yu's current tyrannical mortal body, let alone a mere flame, even jumping into a volcano to take a bath would be nothing more than a drizzle. At this time, Qin Yu's consciousness had fallen into a coma, but his soul instincts were still there. Moreover, the so-called shattering of the soul to erase the consciousness and forge a new heart core was the key to completely erasing the original soul. As his soul felt the threat of annihilation, it instinctively began to drive the fire laws that Qin Yu had already comprehended in an attempt to resist. Under normal circumstances, the comprehension and control of laws would require a relatively long period of time before one could reach the stage of being able to freely control the laws. Although Qin Yu had already comprehended the nearly complete fire laws, in terms of matching them together, he still had an enormous shortcoming. But now, this shortcoming was rapidly rising as the spirit snake's heart wildly forged it. It was said that pressure was a driving force, and the pressure that came from death was undoubtedly the most powerful driving force of all. Thus, as Qin Yu's flesh and blood melted into a nearly liquid state and was about to be absorbed, some faint ripples suddenly appeared within. But if this was it, it still wouldn't be enough. This was because even if he had awakened the fire laws, he still needed time to form a defense. Qin Yu no longer had time. Bang! A deep and dull sound suddenly exploded within the spirit snake's heart. It was an artifact on Qin Yu's body that couldn't withstand the burning of the rules and was destroyed. In the next moment, there was the sound of buzzing wings. A massive swath of purple-back, blue-wing ants appeared, all of them screaming in the high temperature. With their current condition, they simply couldn't withstand the burning of the rule's flames within the spirit snake's body. But then a strange scene occurred. The bodies and wings of the purple-back, blue-wing ants began to rapidly turn crimson beneath the searing heat. They seemed as if they were carved from pure blood jade. They were able to barely resist the burning of the rule's flames. They rushed towards Qin Yu and lifted him up. They tried to rush out of the spirit snake's heart, but they were imprisoned within by the crimson burning power. Although their spiritual intelligence wasn't too high, the purple-back blue-wing ants could still feel the danger their master was facing. They screamed out in pain, trying to rouse their master, but in the end it was all in vain. Suddenly, all of the purple-back blue-wing ants began to burn within the flames of rules. But this burning didn't destroy their flesh and blood. Rather, it produced a phenomenon similar to Qin Yu's flesh and blood melting. Purple-back blue-wing ants. The winged ants turned into raindrops that fell onto Qin Yu's body, instantly fusing into him. Hum! Hum! On the surface of his body, the melted flesh and blood began to shake. Crimson motes of light began to shine. If one looked carefully, they would discover that these motes of light were the spots where the purple-back blue-wing ants had fallen after they had melted. Then, with these motes of light as the center, crimson lines began to appear. They rapidly extended outwards, connecting all of the motes of light together. When all of the motes of light connected together, a crimson robe suddenly appeared on the surface of Qin Yu's body. Thus, from this moment onwards, all of the burning power of the rule's flames were no longer able to cause him any harm. Thus, in a state of unconsciousness, he finally rushed through this test that couldn't be considered a test, but was in fact incomparably dangerous. Thus, Qin Yu finally sat down on the dining chair and obtained the qualifications to open this grand feast. But in truth, the true danger had only just begun from the moment he sat down on the dining chair. This was because whether it was a hidden treasure or a grand feast, even if one had good teeth, they still needed to be able to eat. Otherwise, the only result would be a loud explosion. Of the myriad ways to die in the world, bursting oneself to death was likely the most difficult and also one of the rarer methods. Everyone retreated. The area where the heavenly retribution descended was regarded as a forbidden zone. This place still maintained its original horrifying appearance. The rich heaven and earth spiritual strength of the Lost Garden and the tyrannical reproductive abilities of the ancient plants didn't have any effect on this. Now, a figure stood outside the boundary line, a dignified expression on his face. This person was Zhang Zhongshi, the one who had a deep grudge against Baifeng for killing his wife and child. He was the one who had joined forces with everyone to lay down an array formation to kill him. It was just that today, although Zhang Zhongshi still looked the same as before, his aura had undergone a heaven-shaking change. For instance, as he looked at the area where the heavenly retribution descended, his eyes were filled with the vicissitudes of time that could only be obtained after experiencing the endless years. This was a feeling that could only be sensed but not described. In short, unless it was someone he was particularly familiar with, even if Zhang Zhongshi changed his clothes and hairstyle, he wouldn't dare to recognize this as the same person. Standing outside the area where the heavenly retribution descended, Zhang Zhongshi hesitated again and again. In the end, he didn't step inside, but he also didn't choose to leave. With a step, the ground quietly split open. Zhang Zhongshi sank in, and the ground was restored to its original state. He didn't dare to recklessly rush in, but he also didn't want to give up. So he could only wait here, wait for the person inside to come out. Originally, he had paid a huge price to obtain the opportunity to enter the lost garden. His goal had been to lock onto another target. This goal required the bloodline of the White Phoenix clan to open. But after it was destroyed by him, he never imagined that he would obtain another harvest. A cultivator that could attract heavenly retribution and not die, he was well aware of what this meant, and for this he would pay any price. Thus, Zhang Zhongshi's goal in entering the Lost Garden completely changed. He would wait for this person, kill this person, and seize everything he had. Qin Yu woke up. Then he discovered that he was far too happy, so happy that he wanted to immerse himself in this state for all eternity. Endless strength constantly fused into his body. Every inch of his flesh and blood, every inch of his soul, was desperately eating and eating. This feeling could be explained as a glutton that had been starving for a long time and now had a feast to eat and drink in front of him. This wasn't something that could be described with just the word happy. But before Qin Yu had time to carefully savor this feeling, he was interrupted by a weak and sad voice that was filled with joy and excitement. "Master, you've woken up. You've finally woken up. I am the dignified shadow of the abyss. What a noble and formidable existence I am. But only the heavens know how much I have suffered and how much I have suffered in order to survive until now." The old turtle swore that he would never experience such an experience a second time in his life. Qin Yu was frightened. The old turtle's current state was far more miserable than any of the previous times. Now his entire person had already become a ball, only slightly rolling up and down mist. Not even a human silhouette could be seen. It gave off a feeling as if a casual breath could blow him away. "Hungry, I'm starving to death. Master, save me, save me." In terms of strength, it was an exaggeration to say that the spirit snake's body was inexhaustible. But it wouldn't be too much to say that it could bury mountains and fill seas. But while this was the truth, he didn't dare to move. Thinking of this, the old turtle wanted to cry. Put yourself in his shoes and think about it. A person struggling on the edge of starvation. And there was clearly a feast in front of them that they could eat just by opening their mouths. But they had to forcefully endure it, not even daring to take a single bite. There was nothing that could be done. Who told that woman to be far too terrifying? She was someone that could even smash apart heavenly punishment. She absolutely couldn't be provoked. No matter how it was said, this was a cruel torture, a torture that could absolutely take a person's life. I'm too miserable. I'm so miserable that I've lost all interest and hope towards the future and towards life. I'm just bragging. No matter what happens, we need to maintain a positive and optimistic attitude. So we must live on. No matter what happens, no matter what we experience, we must stubbornly continue living on. Qin, you didn't understand. The old turtle was already in such a state. So why didn't he personally start eating? But in this current situation, he feared that if he said a few more words, he would completely dissipate. After all, for him to be able to smoothly eat this feast this time, the old turtle had contributed great lemon? No, the one who contributed the most is a woman. I owe her a huge favor, so much so that no matter what happens in the future, I have to be willing to work like a slave for her and accept her endless exploitation over and over again. Qin Yu's complexion changed and his heart filled with horror. Just what was going on? How could I have such terrifying thoughts? Not only did I have such thoughts, but the most important thing is that I firmly believe in them. Even now, when I think about it, I still feel that I should be her slave. What? Just what is going on? Qin Yu was startled, and the old turtle suffered. Sometimes things were like this. In an incomparably difficult moment, it might not be too difficult for a person to persist for a little longer. But what if you were given a glimmer of hope to be freed, but in the next moment, that hope was taken away? This massive psychological gap would cause the distress you were enduring to instantly swell up, enough to collapse the will of the vast majority of people. Now, the old turtle had suffered this sort of critical blow. He originally thought that everything he had experienced was the greatest tragedy in the world. But he never imagined that this tragedy could continue to escalate. Chinyu, how could you do this to me? To a loyal and devoted minister who fought to the last breath for you. Rage blazed and his consciousness wavered. The old turtle was instantly stunned. He could clearly feel that in that moment just now, he had almost completely dissipated. Fuck, that was true death. As a shadow, once he dissipated, there was no way to reverse it. If I'm scared, I'll admit defeat. If I'm angry, then hurry up and fuck off. I want to be a bootlicker. I want to wag my tail and beg for mercy. Master, save me. I beg you to hurry and save me. I really can't hold on any longer. This little turtle is about to die. What was a turtle? As long as he could live, he could even be green. Chinyu struggled to regain his composure from his self-doubt and denial. With a thought, a portion of the strength he had absorbed into his body suddenly separated out. The old turtle let out a long, drawn-out breath as if he wanted to vent out all the fear and despair that had accumulated in his heart. It was to the point that people couldn't help but worry that he might choke himself to death because he exhaled too much. Chinyu patiently waited for the old turtle to finish. Then he said in a low voice, "Before I fell unconscious, I seem to have seen a woman. But my impression of her has become extremely vague. I only remember that I owed her a great favor. Is that true?" What nonsense. Of course there was. If it weren't for that woman helping out, we would all be nothing but dregs right now. But while the truth was like this, the old turtle rolled his eyes and completely stripped himself of all responsibility. "Master, you've already seen for yourself that my condition is like this. I'm desperately trying to survive, so how could I be in the mood to sense what's happening in the outside world? So, I don't know what you're talking about." Chinyu's complexion darkened. "You don't know? Are you sure?" The old turtle's heart raced like thunder. There was nothing he could do about it. Right now, his life was in Chinyu's hands. If he wasn't happy and lost his supply of strength, he would immediately return to a state of near collapse. To speak the truth, that was impossible, absolutely impossible. Although there were risks in lying to Chinyu, the chances of passing weren't small. If he really said anything about that woman, then he would truly die. So, after hesitating for less than half a breath of time, the old turtle shook his head. "I don't know, I really don't know." Chinyu was skeptical. He hesitated for a moment, not speaking again. In truth, his memories were extremely vague, and he felt as if he had just been dreaming. But this was only a dream, and yet he felt as if he owed someone a great favor and even had to repay it with his life. This was just too ridiculous. Chinyu's intuition told him that there was a problem. There was definitely a problem here. The old turtle was afraid that he would ask more questions. He coughed and quickly changed the topic. "Master, you've woken up. You should hurry and think of a way to survive this hurdle. The spirit snake banquet has already begun. You cannot stop it, nor can you leave the table ahead of time. Either you eat everything you can and obtain great benefits, or you explode from eating too much." Chinyu's complexion changed, and he regained consciousness. He looked around at the dark red aura that was constantly gathering around him and felt his current state. He took a deep breath and said, "From when I fell unconscious until now, how much have I eaten?" The old turtle bitterly smiled. "I was too weak before, so there was no way to estimate. But according to Master's current absorption speed, it should be at most a tenth. So little. It's quite a lot. This is already the fastest speed I can estimate. Perhaps the truth isn't even a tenth." Chinyu's eyes widened and his complexion turned a bit blue. This was very simple. The banquet had just begun, and he was the only customer here. Yet he felt like he was about to be full. This was certainly a very uncomfortable matter. And the key point was that, in the end, this wasn't just a matter of eating too much or too little. This involved his own life or death. Explode from eating too much? No, he refused to accept this outcome. Chapter 1266. If he didn't want to be stuffed to death, he could only save himself. Qin Yu's first thought was to find someone to share the burden with him. At this time, it was better not to worry about the hidden treasures. If he couldn't survive, so what if everything was his? Moreover, those that could share the burden with him were helpers. The stronger they were, the more useful they would be in the future. Without hesitation, Qin Yu made his decision. The old turtle was happy about this. After all, he was so weak that all he had left was a layer of skin, and he was filled with a desire to replenish his strength. But this happiness only lasted for a short period of time before turning into helplessness. This was because, even if he joined in, it was far from enough to face the boundless strength contained in the spirit snake's corpse. Although he could eat to his heart's content now, it would soon turn into pain. After all, he was only a shadow. Even if he risked his life, how much could he eat? Master, don't forget the stone pagoda. This fellow's stomach isn't small. If this were a different time, a different scene, the stone pagoda definitely wouldn't have said these words. This was the strength of a pre-celestial spirit, so why should it be shared with others? But now the old turtle didn't hesitate at all. He pulled the stone pagoda over. There was nothing he could do. If he didn't find more people to eat at today's banquet, he and Qin Yu would 100% explode. Strictly speaking, in terms of misery, the stone pagoda that was nearly submerged in darkness could absolutely compete with the old turtle. Thus, after obtaining Qin Yu's permission, it didn't say a single word and began to desperately draw strength from the contract. The constantly shattering pagoda finally stabilized. Bit by bit, the darkness that was constantly attacking from all directions was also being blocked outside. With the old turtle and the stone pagoda sharing the burden, Qin Yu felt much more relaxed. But he still didn't dare to be careless. What is the current situation? Master, you should know that I am only a shadow, and my capacity is limited. As for the stone pagoda, you might be able to eat a bit more, but at most the two of us can only help you share a third. In other words, there is at least half of the strength that needs to be resolved by Master. Qin Yu rubbed between his eyebrows, a bitter taste in his mouth. This was only 10%. Not only had he completely recovered from his injuries, but he was also full from eating. How could he resolve the remaining 50%? It seemed that no matter what he did, he would still find it hard to escape death. Could it be that he was destined to be a pitiful person who forcefully ate himself to death? Just thinking about it made him sad. Cough. Master, the red robe you're wearing is a manifestation of the power of the law, but it's made up of a group of flying ants. These little things were very lucky, actually showing signs of returning to the origin, possessing a bit of primal chaos attribute. It can probably help you consume some of your energy. Qin Yu looked down at the red robes. The moment he woke up, he already knew what had happened to him. The purple-back blue-wing ants had already disappeared, returning to the robes covering his body. However, they didn't die, but rather switched to a different method of survival. With a thought, his red robes began to shine with a blood-red halo of light. Crimson jade phantoms appeared, flapping their wings with all their might as they screamed and began to absorb the strength that was pouring into his body. But this wasn't enough. It was far from enough, and there was no longer anyone around him that could help him share the strength contained in the spirit snake corpse. The stone pagoda's thoughts suddenly fluctuated. Master, if you want to survive, you can only rely on yourself. The only reason you can't absorb it is because you aren't strong enough and you don't have the ability to withstand it. In the current situation, the only method is to make yourself strong enough and make a bottle that can hold a mountain or sea. Then, you will naturally be able to eat the spirit snake. Qin Yu angrily waved his hand. I know what you're saying, but isn't forging a bottle something that can be done in a day or two? How could there be enough time? Not necessarily. Two voices spoke up at the same time. The old turtle's heart chilled. This damned stone pagoda, it really couldn't hold back and wanted to jump out to fight for power with him? The stone pagoda was thinking that the mysterious aura around Qin Yu wasn't an ordinary character. To defeat him and become the one that Qin Yu placed the most importance on wouldn't be easy. Qin Yu didn't have time to consider the thoughts of the shadow and tower. He said in a low voice, "If there's a way, then say it. The situation is clear. I won't be able to last much longer." The old turtle said, "Body of rules." The stone pagoda said, "Forge the heavens." They spoke up at the same time. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. "You speak first." The one he chose was the old turtle. This was normal. After all, they had worked together for a long time, and he was certainly more trustworthy. The stone pagoda fell silent. He was already prepared for this, but he wasn't too worried because his method was absolutely the most effective for the time being. The old turtle coughed. The impression he had left behind in Qin Yu's mind was beginning to take effect. He had to continue maintaining it and not allow any mistakes to occur. After organizing his thoughts, he slowly said, "There is one thing that is correct. Forging a bottle that is large and sturdy enough is the best solution right now. And what I will give Master is the fastest and most effective method of forging a bottle. The body of rules is a cultivation method that appeared in the abyss a long time ago. To put it simply, it is to constantly fuse the rules into the mortal body. As the number increases, the mortal body will become increasingly strong. Finally, it will become a part of the entire world, an existence similar to a pre-celestial spirit. From the sounds of it, it was similar to the true divinity path." Qin Yu hesitated for a moment. "Stone pagoda, what is your method?" The stone pagoda. "Everything I wanted to say has already been said by some bastard. What else can I do? Damn it, he actually knows this method. No, I can't admit defeat like this." The current situation was already extremely clear. As long as Qin Yu survived this trial, his future prospects would be limitless. Such a Qin Yu was definitely worth fighting for and winning over. "Master, when I said forging the heavens, I meant tempering the mortal body into an existence comparable to the heavens. The general principle is the same as what the old turtle said." The old turtle sneered, a look of disdain on his face. "So you have nothing else to say, so you actually copied my words. You are simply shameless to the extreme. But no matter what you said, even if you spat out a flower, Qin Yu knew in his heart just who was the original creator here. Just what qualifications do you have to fight with me?" The stone pagoda didn't seem to feel the ridicule and disdain from the old turtle. His voice was calm. "Fusing the rules into the flesh and blood in an attempt to forge the mortal body into an existence comparable to the heavens and earth. Or, to put it more bluntly, it is to form a small world of its own. This is not permitted by the will of the world. Thus, this process is not only dangerous, but also excruciatingly painful. There is almost no one that can smoothly persist through it. I believe that a certain tortoise must be clear about this. Otherwise, this kind of body forging method that has appeared in the past otherwise, how could this body forging method that once appeared disappear without a trace? After all, as long as one isn't blind, they can see the prospects of this road of cultivation. To forge one's body into an existence comparable to the heavens and earth. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this is the great Tao of the heavens." Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. The old turtle hurriedly said, "Master, what I said isn't wrong, but there are no true shortcuts in this world. Even if there are, one must pay a price in other aspects. The process of cultivating the body of rules is indeed dangerous and painful, but with my help in addition to Master's powerful will, you will definitely be able to endure it." The stone pagoda lightly said, "Anyone can flatter others, but in reality, it isn't of any help at all." It paused for a moment and then continued to say, "But I can help Master avoid many detours on the road, avoid unnecessary pain, and increase your chances of success. Many years ago, when the heaven forging law first appeared, I already learned of it. To put it bluntly, in the entire vast young world, there aren't many people that can compare with me in this aspect. Moreover, ever since I encountered the great calamity in the past, I was lucky enough to survive. But thanks to Master's rescue, I was able to see the light of day once more. Then, during these lonely and desolate years, I was extremely bored. In order to prevent my consciousness from collapsing, I carefully studied the flaws of the heaven-forging law dozens of times and corrected them. Although I can't say that the heaven-forging law in my hands is perfect, as long as Master cultivates according to my guidance, Master will definitely be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. He was stunned. The old turtle never imagined that this damned stone pagoda would have such a trick up its sleeve. It actually managed to reverse the situation so quickly. Looking at Qin Yu's complexion, it was clear that he was tempted. How hateful! I absolutely cannot fall into a disadvantage. But unfortunately, before the old turtle could retort and sneer to express his disdain, Qin Yu waved his hand and interrupted him. There's no more time. Just cultivate the heaven-forging law you spoke of. Shadow will assist from the side. If there are any problems, you can discuss them together. The feeling of fullness became even more intense. It was like a leather bag that was filled to the brim with water. Now it was as round as a ball. Although the leather bag could continue to hold water as it expanded, sooner or later it would reach its limit. At this time, Qin Yu wasn't in the mood to continue listening to their argument. Right now, they were all grasshoppers on the same rope. If he was unlucky and blew himself up, these two fellows wouldn't have an easy time either. Thus, he wasn't too worried. Moreover, since this was a method proposed by the old turtle and the stone pagoda at the same time, it should be highly feasible. The stone pagoda's voice was calm. Yes, Master. I will do my best to help you overcome this difficulty. After this, I ask that you cultivate according to my guidance. If there is any discomfort, please tell me immediately. Now, I will first tell Master the heaven-forging law. You will need some time to, at least, briefly perceive it. After a brief pause, it said, during the entire cultivation process, you absolutely cannot be disturbed in order to avoid any adverse effects on Master. So, if Shadow doesn't have anything to say, it is best to remain silent throughout. He was angry. He was thoroughly enraged. Damn it. I am the one that Qin Yu values the most skilled, and also the most trustworthy person. What is a broken stone pagoda, like you count for? It was just a momentary stroke of luck, and yet you want to ride over my head like a tyrant? You are simply delusional. The old turtle's lungs nearly exploded with rage. He gasped for breath, and his eyes turned red. Right now, there was only a single thought in his mind, and that was to keep a close eye on him. Keep a close eye on him, and don't let me find any flaws. Otherwise, you bastard will be finished. Chapter 1267. 13 days. If it wasn't for the terrifying will that still shrouded the land of heavenly punishment, Zhang Zhongsher would have suspected that the junior that brought down the land of heavenly punishment had already died. To be able to stay underground in a dark and deathly silent state for 13 days. Well, perhaps there were many cultivators that could also do this. But one could not forget that this was the Lost Garden, a place that represented endless lucky chances. Every breath of time was incomparably precious, and no one could afford to waste 13 days. Even Zhang Zhongsher was no exception. And most importantly, the Lost Garden had already been open for a month, and it could close at any moment. Thinking of this, Zhang Zhongsher frowned. He couldn't help but worry. Could that junior inside be planning on staying here until the Lost Garden closed? If this was really the case, then things were truly troublesome. The 14th day, the 15th day, for half a month, there was no movement in the land of heavenly punishment. Just as Zhang Zhongsher was considering whether or not he should do something, he suddenly opened his eyes, which shone brightly in the dark, sunless underground. Almost at the same time, as if a giant hand had swept across the land of heavenly punishment, the center of the empty and deathly silent land of heavenly punishment suddenly shattered. Then a figure drilled out. He wore blood-red robes, and his entire body was incomparably red. He was filled with heat and irritation, as if he had just been extracted from boiling blood. Heavy panting came from beneath the robes. Just the act of drilling out from underground seemed to have exhausted all of his strength. The blood-red, robed man stood where he was, panting heavily. Then he lifted his head as if trying to determine the direction. After several breaths of time, he left in a certain direction. But the process wasn't smooth. He staggered, and his entire body seemed incomparably weak. Suddenly, his figure became unsteady, and he nearly fell to the ground. He only managed to stabilize himself after taking a step backwards. As the foot landed, a shocking roar suddenly erupted. The ground shook violently and terrifying cracks instantly appeared. With the foot as the center, the cracks spread madly in all directions, densely packed to the end of one's line of sight. There seemed to be a bitter laugh from beneath the blood-red robes. Then he continued to walk away. Moments later, Zhang Zhongshe arrived at the place where the foot had landed. He looked down at the countless cracks on the ground. His eyes were serious and dignified. What a terrifying strength! If this was the outside world, he naturally wouldn't fear it. But this was the Lost Garden, and he didn't possess his full strength in his current state. Therefore, after waiting for half a month, he did not make a move when the person finally came out. The reason why he didn't make a move was because he didn't have absolute confidence. Once he made a move, he might not be able to kill the person and would instead be sending himself to die. But this didn't mean that Zhang Zhongshe would stop just like that. He naturally wouldn't. Even if he really destroyed this puppet, he still wanted to give it a try. However, there was still time. Since it had been open for more than a month, it meant that the Lost Garden was in a long-term state. If nothing went wrong, it would take at least half a month, maybe even longer. Zhang Zhongshe's eyes flashed. He stepped forwards and chased after Qinyu. After the East Sea's birthday banquet, Su Shi was depressed for a period of time. He simply did not want to believe the news that was circulating in the sage Dao circle. That lowly person Qinyu had actually accomplished the heroic feat of slaughtering a saint. With a single leap, he had become a figure that all the second generations of the world respected and revered. Afterwards, when Peach Garden officially announced what had happened between Peach Maiden and Qinyu, he nearly exploded with rage. He didn't dare to say anything in public for fear that he would be ridiculed by others or that he would provoke trouble. He locked himself in his training chamber and vented his anger for an entire day. Why? Not only had that lowly person Qinyu risen to fame, but he had also obtained a noble junior apprentice sister, Peach Maiden. Su sure couldn't understand this at all, and what left him even more pained was that he had become a stepping stone for Qinyu's rise to fame. Although after the matter of slaughtering a saint was confirmed, no one cared about the fact that he had been defeated by Qinyu in a single punch. The more it was like this, the more difficult it was to accept. This was because Su Shi discovered that he didn't even have the qualifications to leave his name by Qinyu's side. What a sad and unacceptable matter this was. The Su family's half-saint sensed his son's depression. After figuring out the reason, he severely warned him not to stir up trouble in the future. Then he thought of a way to help him obtain a spot to enter the Lost Garden. Even a strict father had a soft heart. The Su family's half-saint regarded this son of his with great importance. He hoped that his son would learn from his shame and gain some harvest in the Lost Garden. And today, Su Shi felt that his lucky chance, his future, would finally unfold. "Thank you, my dear father. Little Qinyu, just you wait. Once the Lost Garden closes, I, Su Shi, will surely appear in front of you with a completely new appearance." This was because he had found a source of life, and it was of an extremely high quality. It was so high that the spring water in front of him was a faint purple. Most sources of life were green. The longer they existed, the higher the quality, and the deeper the green would become. And the peak ones even had a chance of transforming into a purple source of life. Pure strength. A purple source of life was equal to at least 10 ordinary green sources of life. What was this? Good fortune. This was a tremendous good fortune. If it weren't for this, How could Sushar have dared to think of looking for Chinyu after leaving the lost garden? What was there to hesitate about? No, not at all. Sushar leapt up. He could feel the extremely rich aura of a source of life in the air. He could also feel the gentle breeze brushing past his cheeks and the fluctuations of his clothes. Closer, closer. That purple source of life was right in front of him, and then everything stopped. Sushar's eyes widened again and again. He desperately kicked his legs, but he was like a giant toad that was upside down. Even so, he didn't move at all. His entire body was frozen in midair by an invisible strength, completely sealed in ice. Pa, pa, the sound of footsteps echoed in the air. Sushar desperately turned his head and roared, "You bastard! It's mine, this source of life is mine. Let go of me." But unfortunately, the owner of these footsteps didn't seem to have any intention of speaking to him, nor would he allow himself to be delayed. A smear of blood, red, light appeared in front of him. This person was covered from head to toe in blood-red robes. When he saw him, he froze. Sushar struggled even more fiercely. "You know me? You must know me. I am Sushar, and my father is a half-sage. If you dare to steal my source of life, the Su family will never let you off." He wasn't an idiot. He knew that if he said these words at this time, the greatest possibility was that he would be silenced by someone else. But an impulsive and easily angered person had a fiery temper that couldn't be suppressed by reason. Once freed, they were like wild bulls. And most importantly, this purple source of life could be said to be Sushar's greatest good fortune besides his reincarnation. It could even change his destiny and make his future infinitely bright. But now he was frozen in midair, just a foot away from the source of life. Yet he couldn't move at all, as if he were separated by the heavens and earth. How could he not go insane? The blood-red, robed man looked away and continued to walk towards the source of life. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. He was about to enter. Sushar cursed loudly. But this time, as soon as he opened his mouth, he was hit in the head. Bam! He flew out and fell into a coma. On the other side, the blood-red, robed man stopped. He muttered to himself, "He seems a bit heavy-handed. He is at least an acquaintance, and he stole something from someone else. Forget it. Since he's not dead, it's fine as long as he's alive." He stepped into the source of life and instantly sank into it. A light purple layer of ice instantly condensed. In the next moment, a surprising scene appeared. The purple layer of ice suddenly disappeared from sight. If it weren't for the fact that there was a giant hole in the ground, one would have suspected that what they saw just now was an illusion. In a daze, after an unknown period of time, Sushar suddenly jumped up and roared, "You bastard! Don't touch my source of life!" Then, not too far away, he saw a giant hole in the ground. As if he had been struck in the head, Sushar felt the world spin around him. With a thud, he fell to the ground once more. Immediately after that, sorrowful cries and curses reverberated in the air like a river bursting its banks. If curses could kill, Chinyu would have died a horrible death. But unfortunately it couldn't. But even so, his current situation was still very uncomfortable. A purple source of life did contain a powerful strength, but after experiencing the despair of not being able to eat the spirit snake, it was only ordinary in Chinyu's eyes. That's right, as you can see, Chinyu survived. He managed to preserve his life at the spirit snake banquet. As for his body of rules, he barely succeeded. Otherwise it would have been impossible for him to eat it all. But since he barely succeeded, that meant there were still some problems. Cough, cough. Fine, the problems weren't small. For instance, the blood-red robes on Chinyu's body. This was because they were blood-red to begin with, and also because they had absorbed enough blood. Chinyu's current state could be seen as a puppet that had been smashed to pieces and then pieced back together. That wasn't too appropriate. Or perhaps it was better to say that he was a bag of explosives that had been buried with mines. In short, he had barely managed to condense his body of rules. In an imperfect state, he had forcefully swallowed up too much strength, resulting in his current situation. For instance, Qin Yu's body was on the verge of collapse at any moment. Beneath his blood-red robes was a terrifying scene, his flesh and blood collapsing and regenerating at any moment. It was just that Qin Yu felt that his blood was far too precious. He had risked his life to obtain it, so he couldn't waste it. Thus, he had the purple-back blue-wing ants eat it, causing his blood-red robes to become increasingly red. To put it simply, although Qin Yu hadn't been stuffed to death, he was in an extremely bad state. He had to continue searching for the source of life and absorb its strength to maintain his body of rules from collapsing. At the same time, he had to think of a way to repair himself. Qin Yu had some impression of this fellow Su Shi, but how should he put it? Even if his luck wasn't too good, Qin Yu's current state, in order to preserve his life, let alone Su Shi, even if his eldest senior apprentice brother were here, he would have given him a sneak attack. But the truth was that even the purple source of life couldn't substantially improve Qin Yu's current situation. The collapse of his body of rules had been temporarily suppressed, but this was only temporary. In truth, to completely repair it was far more difficult than imagined. According to the old turtle, this was the price one had to pay in order to kill a pre-celestial spirit, whether it was the difficulty of killing the spirit snake, the terror of the heavenly retribution, the test after killing it, the life and death crisis of refining its flesh and blood, or even the possibility of dying at any moment after succeeding. A pre-celestial spirit was born along with the world and possessed certain attributes that were similar to the world. To put it bluntly, killing the spirit snake was no different from killing a simplified version of the world's avatar. There was no price at all. Haha, just what were you thinking? Killing a saint would result in the punishment of the heavens and earth, much less what Qin Yu had just done. It was already a miracle that he was still alive. Qin Yu clenched his teeth. If it weren't for the fact that he couldn't be angry in his current state, he really would have attacked this bastard and taught him a lesson. Why didn't you say these things before? Why are you making such sarcastic remarks now? Do you think my saber can't be used and you've grown bolder? Just you wait, I'll remember this. Once I'm better, we'll slowly settle the score. But in truth, Qin Yu was well aware that no matter how much the old turtle said, he wouldn't give up so easily. No, he absolutely wouldn't give up. The probability of encountering a pre-celestial spirit in its infant state was extremely small. It could be said that this was the first time he had ever encountered such a thing. If he chose to retreat because he feared the consequences, then Qin Yu would surely regret it, and he would never be able to walk out of this shadow in his life. Moreover, when a cultivator cultivated, they faced difficulties to begin with. It was like walking on a single log bridge. Every step was fraught with danger, and there was a chance of losing one's life at any moment. If he was overly cautious or fearful of difficulties, then there wouldn't be the Qin Yu of today. So, this matter couldn't be blamed on anyone else. Qin Yu understood that these thoughts were only used to divert his attention. At the same time, it was also to vent some of the anger and restlessness in his heart. Anyone who walked on the edge of death at every moment would feel like they were sitting on a volcano that could erupt at any moment. They wouldn't be in a good mood at all. Qin Yu felt that it wasn't easy for him to maintain a calm mind right now. It hasn't been easy for me. Could it be that the punishment hasn't passed yet? I just killed a pre-celestial spirit, and it was the one that provoked me first. Now that I've killed it and eaten it, I've barely managed to form a body of rules, and I'm about the same as a pre-celestial spirit, so can I be merciful just this once? As his thoughts continued to wander, the strength of the purple source of life was completely exhausted. Qin Yu's lips twitched. This absorption speed was far faster than he had imagined. What was even more frightening was the rate at which this body was being consumed. In his current state, he wouldn't be able to hold on for long. The body of rules collapsed and Qin Yu died. If he didn't want to die, he had to continue searching for a source of life. It had to be a high-grade source so that he could absorb the strength to suppress it. However, As mentioned before, the reason why Qin ended up in such a tragic state was because his imperfect body of rules had absorbed too much strength. Therefore, the phrase quenching thirst with poison was probably very appropriate to describe Qin Yu's current actions. Absorbing the source of life to suppress the collapse of the body of rules, and then the more strength his body absorbed, the greater the hidden dangers of the body of rules, and the higher the risk of collapse. This was a vicious cycle. Qin Yu was very clear about this, but he had no choice. He could only take it one step at a time and hope that he could find a turning point in the future. He couldn't delay any longer. Time was too precious now. Previously, he thought it was precious because he had to search for the source of life with all his might. Although it was the same now and he had to continue searching for the source of life, the meaning had completely changed. One was to become stronger, and the other was to save his life. It was obvious that it was getting harder the more he went. As mentioned before, the Zhang family that Zhang Zhongshi came from was quite famous in the vast Yang world. To be able to enter the Sage Dao circle with no Sage Dao talent and be respected by everyone, this was a demonstration of their strength. In addition, the matter of him killing Bai Feng had not yet spread in the Lost Garden, so Zhang Zhongshi's credibility was still very high. Therefore, he easily found his first transaction target. The reason was that he could faintly sense the aura of the source of life through the power of the Zhang family's secret array. However, this method violated the rules of the Lost Garden, so he couldn't do it himself, otherwise he would be punished. Therefore, Zhang Zhongshi needed a partner. The two of them would work together to search for the source of life. The specific distribution rules were very detailed, so detailed that it was easy for the partner he chose to cooperate with to believe that he had already made preparations and wasn't just spouting nonsense. There was no need to elaborate on the specifics. In short, after a secret discussion, the chosen partner quickly left with an excited expression. As he watched this person leave, the smile on Zhang Zhongshi's face gradually faded, leaving only a cold indifference. Chapter 1268. Su Wei was a wandering cultivator. In truth, when one's cultivation reached this step, perhaps one day their luck would change and they would be able to see the boundless sea of suffering. There weren't many people that maintained their status as a wandering cultivator. The reason he hadn't found a holy land to rely on was because his cultivation method was different from the norm. To put it simply, he needed to constantly pluck, cough, cough. That's right, that's right, that's what you're thinking right now. In truth, Su Wei's cultivation method couldn't be considered evil or evil. Rather, it was beneficial to both sides and could be considered an orthodox dual cultivation method. Even so, it didn't sound good. In addition, Su Wei also had some scruples in his heart, so after a while he had been delayed. He might as well become a wandering cultivator, free and unfettered. Of course, there was another important reason for this choice, and that was that Su Wei's skin was quite good. He was the creamy type and was very popular in the circle of female cultivators. This meant that he didn't lack targets to cultivate with, and as time passed, the number would continue to increase. But there was one good thing about Su Wei, and that was that he was an extremely cautious person. He wouldn't move against people he shouldn't move against, and he would absolutely follow the principle of free will and never use force. In the end, he could be considered a cautious and principled person. Otherwise, after all these years of climbing mountains and exploring valleys, it would have been impossible for him to live peacefully to this day. Such a person, of course, would not easily believe in the words of others. He had heard of Zhang Zhongshi before. After all, he had violated several taboos of the peach garden, and there weren't many people that could live peacefully. But Su Wei only believed 30% of the cooperation he spoke of. He always felt that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Of course, even if he was overthinking things, it wouldn't be a bad thing to carefully verify things before making a move. With this in mind, Su Wei set off according to the directions. Disregarding everything else, the Zhang family's array formation methods could be called mystical. At the very least, the little compass in his hand was extremely amazing. It could actually sense the aura of his source of life. When a person was concentrating on something, they would inevitably be annoyed if they were disturbed. In particular, when this matter involved their life or death, the degree of annoyance would increase by at least 10 times. Qin Yu was currently in a state of 10 times more anger. Perhaps it was because he had stolen Su Shi's purple source of life, or perhaps he had been too heavy-handed in his attacks. But now he was plagued by bad luck. Starting from the first cultivator who saw him and immediately rushed over, there were now 4 people who had come to offer their heads to him. Although he had taken their lives, he had also paid a considerable price. His body of laws had nearly collapsed several times. Moreover, the plan to search for the source of life had been seriously affected. If it was only 1 or 2, it would have been fine, but he had already taken 4 heads. If someone said there wasn't something fishy going on, Qin Yu absolutely wouldn't believe it. He felt that it was very likely that he was being targeted. But this was the Lost Garden, and he was constantly on the move. Furthermore, his movements were irregular. So who would be able to lock onto him? Qin Yu couldn't figure it out. He had the old turtle exhaust some of its strength to carry out several probes, but in the end he wasn't able to find anything. This was depressing. Cough! Master, please go easy on them. It's best if you can catch one of them. When the time comes, we'll interrogate them and will naturally gain something. These words were correct. Qin Yu was also well aware that this was the best choice he had right now. But the problem was that he couldn't do it. In his current state, Qin Yu simply couldn't control his strength. Strictly speaking, it could be said that Su Shi was lucky to be knocked unconscious. But in fact, of the 4 people who were offered their heads, none of them had a complete corpse. Well, that could be considered a cover-up, but the truth was that with a single punch, the other side would explode with a loud bang. The visual effect was truly horrifying. The stone pagoda lightly said, "A certain turtle likes to spout nonsense." With Master's current state, if someone were to rush up and attack you, there would be no room for negotiation. Shut up. When I am speaking to Master, do you think you have the right to interrupt? The old turtle angrily roared, an angry look on his face. The stone pagoda's tone didn't change. Are you saying that you and Master are existences on the same level? Ha. A certain turtle's ego is inflated, and my subconscious is filled with disrespect towards Master. I'm not. The turtle was terrified. He hurriedly explained, Master, don't listen to this villain trying to drive a wedge between us. I am loyal and devoted to you. Qin Yu rubbed between his eyebrows. All of you, shut up. His ears were quiet. Ever since these 2 fellows forged their bodies of rules, they had been fighting endlessly. Didn't they know what time it was now? Whether or not he could survive was already a problem. So how could he care about anything else? But there was one point that the old turtle was right. As long as he caught one person, he would be able to figure out what was going on. Even if he couldn't, he would at least be able to grasp some general clues. But the problem was that when these people saw him, they would first gnash their teeth in anger. Then their eyes would fill with greed, and they would attack with heavy blows. In his current state, he might explode if he was hit once, so how could he risk his life? If he attacked, the other party would shatter. It was impossible for him to hold back, at least not in a short period of time. Then he could only hope that the other party could be a bit more rational and restrained, or perhaps be more resistant to beatings. Don't die in a single punch. The old turtle suddenly said, Master, someone is coming. He humphed, full of contempt. The stone tower fell silent. He knew that, at least in terms of perception, he was far from being able to compare with the abyssal shade. The more he spoke, the more humiliated he would be. Thus he maintained his silence, playing to his strengths and avoiding his weaknesses. If he didn't want to talk, what could he do? Qin Yu's eyes brightened. He looked down at his fists hidden beneath his blood-red robes and thought that he would use a bit less strength this time. Closer, even closer. As expected, they were coming for him. Su Wei didn't find the source of life. Instead, a figure wearing blood-red robes appeared in front of him. After a brief daze, the compass in his hand began to stir restlessly. An aura was captured and fell into his senses. The aura of the source of life. At this moment, Su Wei frowned and cursed inwardly. It seemed that the source of life that Zhang Zhongshi had discovered had already been found by this person. How hateful! At this time, his heart was filled with regret. He thought that if he hadn't had doubts in his heart, he would have been able to rush here a bit faster, and perhaps he wouldn't have missed out on the source of life. A trace of anger burst out from the depths of his heart. It was like several sparks falling onto a dry grassland in late autumn, instantly setting the prairie ablaze. Damn it, this person had to die. In particular, the blood-red robed figure seemed to be in a poor state, and his aura was incomparably weak. From the looks of it, he had been injured. Good. This was simply too good. While he was sick, he could take his life. This was simply a heaven-sent opportunity. If he killed the blood-red robed figure and obtained his corpse after refining it, he would definitely be able to extract a portion of the source of life strength and restore his own losses. Who? Su Wei's breathing became heavier, and his eyes blazed with a cruel heat. He could faintly feel that something wasn't right, but the anger in his chest made it impossible for him to calmly think. With a loud bang, Su Wei instantly rushed out. Beneath the blood-red robes, Qin Yu revealed a helpless expression. He had come again and again. Did he really look like he was easy to bully? Otherwise, why would everyone who saw him have such an impatient expression, as if they wanted to rush up and kill him? Stop! Qin Yu roared, but it was clearly futile. With a helpless look in his eyes, he punched out. Bang! The air suddenly twisted, forming a pale, white mass of air that could be seen with the naked eye. It was over. He hadn't held back again. The person rushing over from the opposite side was instantly sent flying. Based on previous experiences, he would immediately explode with a bang. But this time, there seemed to be something different. With a dull thud, Su Wei smashed a deep pit into the ground. He lay there, his eyes wide open as if he hadn't yet reacted. Kacha! With a light sound, a jade archive hanging around his neck broke into 2 pieces. In his life, Su Wei had enjoyed many fragrant and soft pleasures. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that his luck with women was off the charts. And what was most amazing was that besides having a good outer appearance, he also had a high IQ and EQ. This also caused Su Wei to not only be able to float around in a sea of flowers, but also obtain harvest from them. For instance, the reason a wandering cultivator like him was able to obtain a spot to enter the Lost Garden was because a certain woman had helped him. Another example would be the broken jade archive that hung around his neck. It was a treasure given to him by the daughter of a noble family. Su Wei was someone who knew what was good and what was bad. He certainly knew that this treasure was a true treasure. He had diligently served it, and since then, it had never left his side. But today, this death substitution jade pendant that was said to be able to block a calamity for its master had actually shattered like this. Didn't that mean that he had already died once just now? If it weren't for this jade pendant, there was a high chance that he would be the one to shatter now. Whatever killing intent or anger or anything else, all of it was instantly erased. Su Wei's forehead was covered in sweat and his complexion paled. Still alive? So it was the death substitution jade pendant. What a good thing. The blood-robed man walked to the edge of the pit, his voice low and hoarse. But I guess that you only have this piece on you. So if I attack you again, you should die. More sweat dripped down Su Wei's forehead, dripping down from the corners of his eyes. But as someone with a high IQ and EQ, he finally regained his composure. If this blood-robed man really wanted to kill him, he could have just done so. There was no need for him to speak at all. In other words, since this person had spoken, that meant he still had a chance to continue living. Fellow Taoist, as long as you can be magnanimous and spare my life, no matter what request you have, please feel free to speak. Qin Yu's eyes flashed with satisfaction. This person was actually a smart person. That was even better. Otherwise, if he were to encounter another brute similar to Su Shi, that would be a real headache. He wanted to snap his fingers, but he only thought about it for a moment before putting down this thought. In his current state, he feared that if he snapped his fingers, both his fingers would explode. He might as well get straight to the point. As long as you answer truthfully and don't hide anything, it isn't impossible for me to spare your life. Chin, you said from beneath the blood-red robes. Speak. Who sent you to kill me?